We need to talk about how this fandom got One Piece completely backwards anime autopsy here, and we need to have a conversation about how this community talks about the ending of One Piece, because at this point, I'm convinced we are arguing over a completely different manga than the one Oda is actually writing. Every day I see the same 3 takes on the timeline. One Piece is just the friends. One Piece is just the gold. One Piece is a spaceship to the moon. And listen to me. All of that discourse completely misses what Oda has already spelled out in the text. Here's the thing. We are not suffering from a lack of clues. We are suffering from a total collapse of standards for what counts as a clue in the first place. On one side, you've got people screenshotting Loguetown, Jaya, Oden's flashback, Rayleigh's speech, slapping them next to Egghead panels and declaring, "See, Oda planned every atom of this from chapter 1. On the other side, you've got the exact opposite crowd going, "Relax, it's a kid's comic. You're doing copium. None of this foreshadowing is intentional. He's making it up week to week." Both of those positions are comforting. Both are wrong. You know the Twitter thread I'm talking about. Someone posts a tiny panel of Laboon from Reverse Mountain, then a shot of Brook in Thriller Bark, and the caption is basically, "Oda is a 4D chess god. He knew the entire ending in 1997. Then the replies are split between worship and eye rolls. Half the fans start building conspiracy boards out of every sun symbol and drum sound effect. The other half show up to say, "You're seeing Jesus in toast, please go outside. This is not a sin. This is normal. We are pattern-seeking goblins." But if every coincidence is proof he planned everything, and every pattern is overthinking, there is no category left for actual documented pre-planning. And I say this with love. I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing percentage of my adult life rereading One Piece, cross-referencing SBS answers, digging through old Jump interviews and publication timelines, trying to answer one very boring, very specific question. How much of the ending did this author actually lock in before chapter 1 went to print? Not vibes. Not headcanon. Receipts. Because when Oda has an old woman in drum talk about the dawn of the world, when Rayleigh tells the Straw Hats that Roger learned everything on Laugh Tale and was simply too early, when Oden's flashback literally shows the crew laughing at a real physical treasure and naming the island after that reaction, that is not random. That is not just the friends. That is not, "It's only gold, go home." That is a planned endgame quietly sitting in plain sight for 25 years. So here's my core provocation for this entire video. Oda has already told us how One Piece ends. The problem is not that we don't have enough hints. The problem is that our foreshadowing radar is completely scrambled, and until we fix what we count as intentional setup versus coincidence versus retrofit, we are going to keep missing the ending that's been on the page since East Blue. I need you to stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to be able to predict the last panel with receipts. If we don't define foreshadowing, this whole video is pointless. So if I'm going to sit here and drag you through the next 2+ hours of receipts, interviews, panels, and me pausing every 5 minutes to zoom in on some background seagull, we need to get something straight. If you're going to invest that time, I owe you more than vibes. I owe you a framework. Because right now, the word foreshadowing in this community is monopoly money. It spends everywhere and means nothing. Someone posts a panel of Laboon in East Blue next to Brook in Thriller Bark. Peak foreshadowing. Someone posts a random buggy gag next to Cross Guild. Peak foreshadowing. Someone finds a cloud shaped vaguely like a straw hat. Apparently Oda planned Egghead in chapter 3. We've broken the word. Here's the thing. If every coincidence is foreshadowing and every retcon is genius planning, then we literally cannot have a serious conversation about whether Oda told us the ending. We can't tell the difference between an author intentionally planting a time bomb in Loguetown and a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast whenever a D smiles. That's the central thesis of this whole monster. The fandom has misused foreshadowing so badly that functionally it's meaningless. And until we fix that, we cannot answer the question, did Oda plan the ending? We can't even answer, did Oda already show us the ending? Because the word we would use to prove it has turned into static. This is not a sin. This is normal. Fans are supposed to overread. You're supposed to see the dawn of the world comments from Kureha and Pedro and slam them against Nika's drums of liberation and go, oh my god, global liberation foreshadowing. This is fine. The problem is, when we put that in the same category as, say, Oden's flashback literally showing Roger laughing at a real treasure on Laugh-Tale and naming the island after that reaction. Those are not the same kind of move. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this video is build a 3-part model and then stress test it across the entire publication history, from East Blue to Egghead. First category, actual foreshadowing in the classical sense, where the author intentionally plants a setup for a payoff they already know. Second category, retrofitting, where Oda goes back, grabs something loose, and assigns it a new planned meaning later. And then there's a third category I'll introduce in a bit that explains why Rayleigh's speech at Sabaody, the Void Century breadcrumbs from Ohara to Zoo to Wano, and Egghead's information dump all feel different from both. I need you to stick around, because once we separate those three, something wild happens. When we reread the One Piece hints about the treasure being real, the final war, the ancient kingdom, and Luffy's crazier than Pirate King dream through that lens, you stop guessing and start reconstructing. By the end, you're going to be able to make a specific, evidence-backed prediction about the final panel, not because I'm psychic, but because we finally start reading Oda on Oda's terms. And to do that, we have to kill your current definition of foreshadowing in the next 5 minutes. What foreshadowing actually means, and why your favorite thread is wrong. So if we're going to kill your definition of foreshadowing, we need to be very clear about what we're replacing it with. I need you to actually uninstall the fandom version from your brain for a second, because it's been quietly sabotaging how you read this story. Here's the thing. In classical terms, foreshadowing is boringly specific. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants information early in the story, already knowing the later event it points to. The key word is intentionally. The setup is written with a particular payoff already in mind. If the author didn't know the payoff yet when they wrote the setup, it can be cool, it can be meaningful, it can be genius, but it is not foreshadowing. That's where Chekhov's gun comes in. You've heard the line, if there's a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it needs to go off by Act 3. People quote that and then turn into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Every bottle on the shelf, gun. Every side character, gun. Every panel composition, gun. But Chekhov's point wasn't everything is secretly important. It was about economy and promise. You only hang the gun there because you already know someone's getting shot. In ideal theory, this is easy. Imagine a novelist who writes the whole book before publishing a word. They outline, draft, revise, shuffle chapters. They can go back to page 10 and add a single sentence that perfectly tees up the twist on page 410. That's pristine foreshadowing. Pure cause and effect, all planned in one continuous act of writing. Now compare that to a weekly serialized manga. You're drawing 19 pages on no sleep. Editors are yelling. Popularity polls are threatening your favorite character, and the magazine can cancel you if sales dip. You cannot casually go back and add a line in chapter 23. Reality is messy. Plans change. Ideas evolve. Sometimes the author discovers a better payoff years later and retrofits an old detail. This is not a sin. This is normal. It's how most long-form storytelling survives. The problem is that our community has started calling all of that foreshadowing. A symbol that shows up twice? Foreshadowing. A background marine who later gets a name? Foreshadowing. 2 panels that rhyme visually across 1,000 chapters? Foreshadowing. No evidence the author had the later scene in mind, no interview, no structural necessity, just vibes. The word has quietly turned into thing that feels connected in hindsight, which is a fun game, but a terrible analytical category. Pattern interrupt. Not everything connected is planned. Listen to me. This doesn't mean you're wrong to notice echoes. This is fine. This is normal fan behavior. But if we call every echo foreshadowing, then actual, documented, pre-planned setups lose their power, and we can't measure what Oda is really doing. So for this video, I'm setting a strict standard. I will only label something foreshadowing if there's strong evidence Oda already knew the payoff when he drew the setup. That can be his own interviews, structural inevitability, or integration so tight it would be nearly impossible to improvise. Everything else, different category. And once we use that standard, the way One Piece points at its ending stops being, wow, neat coincidence, and starts feeling terrifyingly deliberate. Next, I'll show you the payoffs that meet that bar. Retrofitting, the secret engine behind long-running manga. So when I say everything else is a different category, I'm not just being pedantic. I'm opening the door to the dirty secret of long-running manga, retrofitting. And listen to me, if you've been in the community for any amount of time, you've seen people treat that word as a slur. Oh, that wasn't foreshadowing. The author just made it up later. As if that automatically makes it bad writing. Here's the thing. Retrofitting is simply when an author takes something they wrote earlier. Maybe a gag, maybe a background detail, maybe a throwaway line with no intentional plan behind it, and later assigns it a new meaning or function. They grab that old piece, plug it into a larger design, and suddenly it looks planned. The difference from foreshadowing is intent at the time of writing. Foreshadowing is, I know exactly what this will pay off. Retrofitting is, oh, I can use that. This is not a sin. This is not bad storytelling by default. In a weekly manga that runs for decades, this is survival. You cannot pre-plan every joke face, every side character, every island quirk from chapter 1 without your brain melting out of your ears. So what do? You build some core pillars ahead of time, and then you retrofit around them. You treat your own back catalogue as a parts warehouse. In practice, it's very mundane. An author remembers an old joke character and realizes they can elevate them into a serious player. A random island that was just cloud place with weird trial guy becomes the perfect spot to stash an ancient kingdom clue. A dumb gag about a samurai cutting a dragon's fire turns into the emotional scar tissue of an entire country. You reread it and go, wow, what foreshadowing. But behind the scenes it was, oh hey, that fits. This is normal. This is fine. The quality test isn't, was it planned in 1997? The test is, does the retrofit feel organic? When you go back, does the earlier material now read as if it was always meant to matter? If the new meaning slots into existing facts without snapping anything, your brain happily rewrites history and calls it genius. If it contradicts established rules or needs an exposition dump to explain away holes, it feels desperate, a patch on a sinking ship instead of a hidden engine. And here's where fans and authors clash. Fans want to believe in 20-year master plans because it flatters our pattern recognition. We get to be the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and posts side-by-side panels for karma. Authors, on the other hand, need flexibility. They need room to change their minds without being crucified on a Reddit thread from 2011. That's why they say vague stuff like, I've had the ending in mind from the start. It keeps the magic trick intact while preserving their ability to retrofit the middle. I need you to keep that distinction in your head, because next we're going to look at Oda's actual retrofits versus the places where he didn't need to improvise at all, the parts where the ending was clearly sitting there before page 1. Why weekly manga planning is basically a sanity speedrun. So before we talk about Oda being a lunatic with binders of endgame notes, we need to talk about what weekly manga actually is. I need you to picture the schedule, because otherwise, he planned 25 years perfectly from day one sounds reasonable. It is not reasonable. It is a horror movie with screen tone. Here's the thing. A standard Jump author is doing around 18 to 20 pages every single week. That means storyboarding the chapter, revising it with the editor, penciling every panel, inking every line, supervising assistants on backgrounds and tones, fixing faces at 3 a.m. because the nose is off. And then on top of that, occasionally cranking out color spreads, volume covers, author comments, and those cursed SBS-style Q&A pages where fans ask if your characters poop. This is not a chill part-time gig. This is a sanity speedrun. And that's before we even get to the external pressure cooker. You're not drawing into the void. You're drawing into a magazine where reader surveys decide if you live or die. Your editor is in your ear going, "We need a popularity spike. Can we get a new hot character? Cooler powers? A form that will sell figures?" The magazine wants hype moments for marketing. The community wants memes. The publisher wants volume sales. Every few months you're expected to drop some new arc villain, some new transformation, some new marketable design that can go on a keychain. Now imagine doing that while also running a flawless 1,000-chapter 4D chess script you allegedly locked in at age 20. Be serious. No human brain is holding a quarter century of perfectly planned foreshadowing in RAM while sleeping 3 hours a night and arguing about panel counts. Trying to perfectly pre-plan every reveal under those conditions would not just be hard, it would cause a complete psychological breakdown. You would start seeing plot threads the way a pattern-seeking monkey sees Jesus in toast. So what actually happens? Most long-running manga evolve. The author starts with a rough destination and some tentpole moments. Then they discover, in real time, what works. Which side characters explode in popularity. Which themes resonate. Which serious villain accidentally becomes a meme. They realize, oh, this gag from chapter 40 could secretly be trauma. This throwaway line from the mentor could actually be prophecy. And they retrofit. They go back in their mind and in their notes and assign intentional meaning to things that were originally just flavor. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how most serial storytelling survives its own schedule. Listen to me. Under this workload, pure, untouched, from day one perfection is basically a myth. What you get instead is a moving target, constantly adjusted by editors, sales, and the author's changing interests. Which is why the "he planned everything 25 years ago" meme is usually nonsense. Except Oda is weird. Oda is the outlier. Not because he never retrofits, but because he started with a genuinely planned spine, the ending, the core mysteries, the big emotional endpoint, and then retrofitted around it with absurd precision. And that combination, that hybrid monster of pre-written backbone plus opportunistic retrofitting, is where the real "he told us the ending" magic lives. So now that we've established that most authors are just trying not to die, we can actually look at Oda's receipts. The places where you can tell the endgame was there from page 1, and the places where he cleverly backfilled the road to reach it. Real foreshadowing. 101. The bare minimum. Any competent storyteller does so before we dive into Oda's receipts. We need to do something really unsexy. We need to talk about basic foreshadowing, not galaxy brain conspiracies. Not Oda predicted the stock market crash. Just storytelling 101. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing, in the strict sense, is boringly simple. An author already knows a later event. They already know the reveal, the death, the twist. And they intentionally plant something earlier because they want you emotionally or logically ready when it hits. That's it. Intent first, seed second. The setup exists because the payoff was planned, not the other way around. So, narrative example. Act 1. A character coughs, a little blood on the handkerchief. They wave it off with a joke. Act 3. They collapse. Terminal illness. Tragic goodbye. That cough is foreshadowing. It tells your brain, hey, something is wrong, without a giant neon sign saying, this guy dies in 40 pages. It's not subtle genius. It's just the author politely paying your emotional cover charge in advance. And this is storytelling 101. Most competent authors in any medium do this constantly. You show the gun on the mantle, because you already wrote the scene where someone gets shot. You mention the storm on the horizon because you already decided the ship is going down. This is not a sin. This is not rare. This is normal. It's how you stop your plot from feeling random and your twists from feeling like the writer tripped over a banana peel and fell into a new idea. Where our community loses the plot is when we treat any echo, any coincidence, any reused visual as proof of 20-year omniscience. A hat shows up twice? Foreshadowing. A word gets repeated? Foreshadowing. At that point, you're a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast and calling it a literature degree. So I need you to lock in some criteria with me, because this is the standard I'm going to beat One Piece over the head with. Real foreshadowing means you can tell the author's knowledge of the payoff is why the earlier scene exists. Not just, this earlier thing can be reinterpreted later. But this earlier thing was clearly built to support that later moment. If you can feel the payoff dictating the setup, that's foreshadowing. If you can feel the setup being repurposed after the fact, that's retrofit. And listen to me, when I later point at a One Piece moment and say, this is real foreshadowing, I'm not saying Oda is a god descending from the storyboard heavens. I'm saying this specific thing meets the strict intent-based standard we just agreed on. It belongs in the same category as the bloody handkerchief, just executed across decades instead of 3 acts. Because once we apply that boring adult definition to Laboon, to Nika, to the Void Century breadcrumbs, something uncomfortable happens. Whole chunks of the ending stop being speculation and start looking pre-written. And the next example I'm going to show you is where that becomes impossible to ignore. Retrofitting in action. How big twists get built after the fact. And the reason that example hits so hard is because it exposes the trick. Once you see how real foreshadowing works, you start to notice when something else is happening. Retrofitting. Here's the thing. Retrofitting is not some shameful, forbidden dark art. Retrofitting is a workflow. An author gets deep into a run, has a new big idea for a twist, and then goes, okay, what did past me already put on the page that I can hijack for this? And then they comb. They reread their own story, hunting for props, lines, minor characters they can reframe as if they were setups all along. So instead of planting the gun in Act 1, because you know there's a shooting in Act 3, you finish Act 3, decide there's going to be a shooting, and then walk back into Act 1 with a roll of duct tape and a Sharpie. You circle some random vase on the mantle. You go, this was a gun the whole time actually. You add a panel, a line, a reaction shot, and suddenly the community is posting side-by-sides going, oh my god, he planned this from chapter 12. Why does that feel so good? Because your brain is a pattern-seeking gremlin that wants to see Jesus in toast. When a twist lands, and suddenly that throwaway line from 5 years ago becomes important, you get this rush. Pattern recognized. Chaos reduced. Your brain goes, this had to be intentional, right? We need the world to feel authored, not random, so we retroactively upgrade coincidence into foreshadowing. And listen to me. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how a ton of long-running manga actually get made. Early arcs are small, almost episodic. The author is still figuring out their cast, their themes, what the story even wants to be when it grows up. Then, 50 chapters in, they realize, oh, this side villain, that's actually the protagonist's uncle now. Suddenly, the whole first year of the series gets woven into a grand mythology that did not exist when Chapter 1 hit the magazine. Interviews give the game away constantly. You'll have fans swearing some panel was a galaxy brain prophecy. And then the author goes on TV and says, yeah, I just remembered I drew that guy once and thought, sure, he can be important now. Or they admit a masked antagonist's identity changed 3 times in the outline. The supposed foreshadowing was them raiding their own junk drawer for parts years later. I need you to understand how powerful that illusion is, because it creates a problem for any discussion of foreshadowing. From the outside, genuine pre-planned setup and extremely clever retrofit land in the exact same category in our heads. They both feel tight, They both feel smart. They both make fans say, he planned it from day one. Which is why, before we get back to Oda's receipts, we need to walk through a different series where the fandom swore everything was intentional, everything was seeded from chapter 1. And then the author came out and said, yeah, I was absolutely making it up as I went. Naruto's Tobi reveal, genius foreshadowing, or just smart retcon. So, enter the safest minefield on the internet, Naruto. Because if we're going to argue about Oda's master plan, we need to talk about the Tobi reveal, and how our community absolutely lost the plot on what planned from day one actually means. Quick recap, so we're on the same page. For years, Tobi is this goofy, almost comic relief Akatsuki guy. Swirly mask, dumb jokes, Tobi is a good boy. Then the mask cracks, the tone flips, and boom! He's Obito, Kakashi's dead childhood friend who got crushed by rocks and donated his Sharingan. The fandom detonates. Overnight, every forum thread turns into, Kishimoto is a genius. He had this mapped out since Obito's death chapter. And immediately, the hunt begins. Fans start building Pinterest boards of foreshadowing. The spiral pattern on Tobi's mask matching the spiral rubble that crushed Obito. The fact he only ever shows one Sharingan eye, on the same side Kakashi has Obito's. The personality echoes. Tobi's clumsy, goofy routine mirroring Obito's earlier dork energy. The I'm nobody line. The constant vague references to the past. Those shots where he talks about the leaf with way too much emotional charge for a random villain. Everywhere you turn, someone's circling panels with red arrows going, see, see. Here's the thing. Kishimoto has gone on record in interviews saying that major twists, especially around the Uchiha, were not nailed down from chapter 1. He's admitted that parts of Tobi's identity shifted. At different planning stages, Tobi was going to be Madara for real, or a different Uchiha stand-in, and that the deeper lore about the clan and the Eye of the Moon plan solidified much later. That doesn't mean he rolled dice every week, but it absolutely undercuts the myth that Obito as Tobi was some sacred tablet carved before Volume 1. So what actually happened? This is where we need to tighten our categories. Foreshadowing, in the strict sense, is when an author intentionally plants a detail because they already know the payoff. Retrofitting is when an author has a flexible slot, mysterious masked man, shadowy Uchiha mastermind, and only later decides, you know what, that's Obito, then goes back and adjusts future appearances and dialogue to make that decision feel retroactively inevitable. Tobi is textbook retrofit. Listen to me. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, how most long-running shonen survives serialization hell. Kishimoto had an empty container labeled Tobi. When he decided to pour Obito into it, he and his editors started curating which old quirks to emphasize, which new flashbacks to add, which mask cracks to draw. The early hints are mostly neutral design choices that only become foreshadowing once the retrofit is in place. And emotionally, this is fine. For a lot of readers, it lands. Kakashi's guilt gets a face. The war gets a tragic spine. As a retrofit, it's actually pretty strong. The problem is when we, as pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast, point at that process and scream perfect foreshadowing. Because when we do that, we erase the specific craft of patching a running story on the fly, and we completely misdiagnose what's going on when an author really did plan the end from the beginning. Which is exactly where Oda comes in, because his big reveals are not operating on this Tobi system at all. Introducing pre-writing, the weird third thing Oda does, which is exactly where Oda comes in, because his big reveals are not operating on this Tobi system at all. And here's the problem. We don't actually have a clean academic word for what he's doing. I went looking. I did the nerd thing. There is outlining, there is foreshadowing, there is retcon, but there isn't a neat term for I secretly built the entire cathedral before you ever saw the first brick. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to coin one. I need you to roll with me on this. I'm calling it pre-writing. Pre-writing is when an author decides the ending, the core mysteries, the emotional endpoint, even specific images, before chapter 1 ever hits the magazine. And then the whole published story is just them slowly walking you toward those fixed points. They are not discovering the destination. They are revealing it in slow motion. Here's the thing. Oda has admitted this in plain language, and we, as a community, just nodded and went back to making power scaling charts. He has said multiple times that he already decided the ending. He has said the final panel has been fixed for decades. That is not normal. This is not, I have a vague idea that there will be a big fight. This is, I know the last shot of the movie, and I've been reverse engineering everything to land on that frame. That's why I'm putting him in this pre-writing category. Most mangaka are juggling deadlines, popularity polls, and editor panic. They discover their ending halfway through, or 3/4 through, or on the train on the way to the final storyboard meeting. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Oda, on the other hand, walks in having already decided what Laugh Tale is, what the One Piece is, what the Void Century reveal does to the world, and what expression is on Luffy's face when it's all over. And this is where we need to separate pre-writing from foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a micro tool. You plant a detail in Loguetown. You pay it off in Marineford. You have Kureha casually drop the will of D, and you know you'll explain it someday. Pre-writing is macro architecture. It's the spine. It's deciding that the One Piece is a real, physical treasure that makes Roger's crew laugh on Laugh Tale, that Luffy will trigger a global dawn of the world, that the final war will smash the world government, and then letting those decisions generate 1,000 little foreshadowing opportunities. So when Oda says, I already decided the ending, I'm arguing he's talking about pre-writing. The final panel? Pre-written. The truth of the ancient kingdom? Pre-written. The shape of Luffy's freest man on the seas moment? Pre-written. That's why the clues about the treasure being tangible, about Joy Boy's failure, about the coming dawn, keep snapping together instead of collapsing the way pure retrofits do. And here's the scary part. Listen to me. If this is pre-writing, then in theory, we can reconstruct the ending. Not guess. Reconstruct. Because the last chapter has been hiding in the first 100 all along, and I'm going to show you where it's buried. The 3-category lens. How we're actually going to read One Piece. So here's what we're going to do with that terrifying idea. We're not just going to scream, ODA is a genius, and post side-by-sides on Twitter. We're going to read One Piece with a very boring, very nerdy 3-category lens. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing. Foreshadowing first. Foreshadowing is intentional micro-setup to payoff. Small seed, known fruit. You put Laboon in Reverse Mountain because you already know there's a skeleton musician with a 50-year promise walking around in your notebook. Retrofitting is different. Retrofitting is when the author goes back to an old panel, an old gag, an old throwaway line, and decides, actually that's important now. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long series survive their own success. And then pre-writing sits above both. Pre-writing is the macro-level stuff that was decided before serialization. The One Piece being real and tangible. The Void Century shape. The will of D. The final war. The emotional endpoint of the freest man on the seas. Those aren't seeds. Those are load-bearing beams. The story isn't discovering them. The story is slowly uncovering them. Here's the thing. For the rest of the video, every major One Piece example we touch, we're going to run through that lens. Setup scene, payoff scene, category. I need you to get used to that rhythm. We'll look at Laboon and Brook, at Skypiea's mantra, and later Haki, at early Nika silhouettes and Gear 5, and we'll ask 3 questions every time. What did Oda have to know here? When did he have to know it? And what evidence do we have from interviews or publication context that he actually knew it then? So structurally, we're doing a chronological tour. We're going to walk from East Blue to Alabasta, to Skypiea, to Water 7 and Enies Lobby, through the rest of pre-time skip, then into the post-time skip world. Fishman Island, Punk Hazard, Dressrosa, Whole Cake, Wano, and finally Egghead. At each stop, we'll pull one or two big Oda planned this for 20 years. Moments the community loves to flex, and we'll actually test them. Pattern interrupt. Some of those flexes are frauds. Some of the most screenshotable proofs of god-tier foreshadowing are just us being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. This is fine. This is normal. The problem is when we can't tell the difference between coincidence, retrofit, and something that was genuinely baked into the ending from day one. To keep us honest, we're going to run a little informal tally in the background. Nothing on screen, just a mental scoreboard. How many of the big endgame elements, the One Piece's nature, Joy Boy, and the coming dawn, the final war, the Straw Hat's dreams, land in pure foreshadowing? How many smell like clean retrofits? And how many clearly trace back to those pre-written core decisions Oda keeps bragging about in interviews? And here's the promise. By the time we crawl out of Wano and hit Egghead, that pattern is going to be so obvious that we can do something dangerous. We can take this lens, point it at all the unresolved setups, and propose a concrete guess for the last panel of the manga that feels less like a theory and more like a spoiler from 1997. You want to see that? Then we need to start at the beginning. Oda's own words. The final panel that existed before Chapter 1. So when I say spoiler from 1997, I'm not being poetic. I'm being almost literal. Because listen to me. Before Chapter 1 of One Piece ever hit Weekly Shonen Jump, Oda had already drawn the last panel. This isn't fandom myth. This is interviews. Over and over, across decades, he said the same thing in slightly different words. Early on, he tells an editor he's already decided the ending. Years later, in Jump Festa comments, he repeats that the core ending has never changed. In another interview, he goes further and says the final panel specifically was decided before serialization and that no matter how long the series runs, that image is fixed. That's insane. That's not, I know roughly how it ends, he probably finds the treasure, shrug. That is an author with a literal snapshot in his head. A single moment he's been steering toward for 25 plus years while the rest of us are arguing about power scaling on Twitter. And here's the thing. If that panel exists, the storytelling physics change. The story isn't wandering toward a vague emotional vibe. The story is orbiting a singularity. Every major reveal about the Void Century, every speech about the dawn of the world, every time Rayleigh or Odin or Roger talks about Laugh-Tale, that all has to curve back into that one image Oda already drew in his brain. Now some of you are already in the comments going, okay, but isn't that just marketing bravado? Trust me bro, I planned it all. I get it. We are a pattern-seeking community. We are the monkey that sees Jesus in toast and calls it foreshadowing. Skepticism is healthy. But this is where consistency matters. Oda has been repeating this claim for decades across different magazines, different editors, different eras of his own fame, and crucially, the editors back him up. You have former editors saying, yeah, he told me the ending years ago, or he showed me documents about the final arc structure. These are people whose job is to manage schedules and page counts, not to LARP as hype men for a YouTube theory video. We need to separate two categories here, the ending and the root. When Oda says the ending is fixed, he does not mean every island, every side character, every gag about Kinnamon's legs was meticulously mapped in 1996. This is normal. This is how long-form writing works. The root is flexible. The emotional endpoint, the historical reveals, the status of the world after Luffy's journey. Those are what's locked. So when he talks about knowing what the One Piece actually is, what the Will of D means, what happened in the Void Century, and what the world looks like after the dawn arrives, he's talking about pillars that support that final panel. The details can wiggle. The pillars do not. Which means the rest of this video is basically a reverse engineering project. I need you to treat every confirmed pre-planned payoff as a calibration point. If the final panel is fixed, then the pre-writing has a shape, and we can start tracing that shape from the crumbs he's already paid off. Because if we can map that shape, the question stops being what if and starts becoming, okay, so what exactly are we going to see in that last image Oda drew before Chapter 1? East Blue isn't just set up, it's the skeleton of the ending. So if that final panel is fixed, if the shape is already drawn, where do you actually start tracing it? You don't start at Marineford. You don't start at Enies Lobby. You start in the so-called tutorial zone, East Blue. And I need you to stop treating East Blue as the part you skip in rewatch and start treating it as Oda's mission statement. Here's the thing. East Blue doesn't just introduce characters. It introduces the categories of ideas that have to be resolved at the end. Freedom, inherited will, dreams that outlive lifespans. The question of what it means to be the freest man on the seas. That's not flavor text, that's the endpoint written in baby font. When Shanks bets his arm on the next generation, when Luffy puts the hat on his head and walks toward the horizon, the author is telling you, very intentionally, this is the emotional equation I'm going to solve in the last chapter. And buried in there is the most important time bomb of all. Luffy's real dream. From early on, you get those weird cutaways where he tells Ace and Sabo, or later the crew, and Oda literally censors the speech bubble. The community treated that as a gag for years. This is fine. This is normal. But from a writing perspective, that is pre-writing graffiti. Oda is saying, Pirate King is not the dream. Pirate King is the job title you need in order to attempt the dream. Whatever he actually said has to be so absurd, so structurally huge, that it only cashes out in the final act. Now, zoom in on the treasure question. From Chapter 1, Buggy, Shanks, every random East Blue pirate talks about the One Piece as a concrete physical thing. Buggy literally builds his entire clown brand on chasing Roger's horde. Shanks loses an arm over the era Roger started. Nobody in East Blue is sitting around going, ah yes, the real treasure was the journey all along. That purely metaphorical reading? That's a fandom retrofit, not authorial foreshadowing. The text treats the treasure as real, and Oda doubles down on that all the way to Rayleigh and Odin. We also need to talk about the crew's dreams. Sanji's all blue, Nami's world map, Chopper's cure-all medicine, Usopp becoming a brave warrior, Zoro as the greatest swordsman. These are not side quests. These are endgame conditions. For all of them to be achievable, the world itself has to be fundamentally different. Borders open, information free, seas connected, oppression dismantled. East Blue quietly tells you the ending can't just be Luffy finds a chest. It has to be Luffy triggers a global state where these impossible dreams are now physically reachable. Put all of that together, and East Blue is a miniature of the finale. A nobody from a forgotten sea gathers a found family, topples local tyrants, exposes small-scale corruption, and sails toward a mythic treasure that everyone swears is real. Now scale that pattern up. Same kid, same hat, but the tyrants are the world government. The map is the entire planet. The all blue is the restructured oceans, and the treasure is the key to the dawn of the world. And if East Blue is the skeleton, then the grand line is Oda slowly putting meat on those bones. So the real question becomes, where do the Void Century, Joy Boy, and Laughtail plug into that baby version blueprint you've been ignoring? Loguetown and Laboon. Proof. Oda was playing the longest emotional game. So when we ask where all those big mysteries plug into the baby blueprint, Oda's answer is basically, go back to the beginning, you cowards. And the first stop on that tour is Loguetown, which is Oda handing you a proto-ending and daring you not to notice. Loguetown is the rehearsal. This is the town where the last era ended and the next one almost gets snuffed out on the same stage. Roger is executed here. Luffy is nearly executed here. That's not just symmetry. That's the author literally walking you through the blocking of his finale. Public square, execution platform, marines, civilians, storm rolling in over a world that thinks it understands pirates. Then a kid smiles on the chopping block and chooses death on his own terms. You're watching the ending in miniature. Because here's the thing. That lightning bolt, the storm, dragons strolling in with a revolutionary army aura before we even have the vocabulary for it? That's not random coolness. That is intentional staging that screams, this boy's existence is plugged into a will that will overturn the world order. Luffy's survival is framed as an act of the world itself, a natural disaster siding with a D. The community keeps calling him the next Roger, and Oda quietly goes, sure, but also the one who finishes what Roger couldn't. And the platform itself is the point. The whole scene is an inherited stage. We need to sit with that. The first Pirate King dies in front of the world and ignites the Great Pirate Era. The future Pirate King almost dies the same way, in front of a much bigger audience, with the world government trying to stomp out the idea before it matures. That tells you the real ending isn't a secret cave ending in a whisper. It's a global witnessed event. A final act where the world has to watch the world government lose control of the narrative in real time. Then Oda hard cuts from that mythic staging to a depressed whale headbutting a mountain. Tone shift whiplash so hard you sprain your neck. This is your pattern interrupt. You think we're in serious endgame foreshadowing territory, and suddenly we're doing Looney Tunes with a kaiju. At Reverse Mountain, Laboon reads as a gag, a side quest. The crew paints a Jolly Roger on a whale, makes a promise, and sails off. And for years, fans treated it as one of those early weird One Piece things that the author would quietly forget. This is not a sin. This is normal. Most long series shed early jokes the way I shed brain cells trying to track power systems. Except Oda doesn't shed it. 500 plus chapters later, Brook walks in and Oda rips your heart out using a whale you haven't thought about since the Clinton administration. The same scars, the same promise, the same exact setup, elevated from gag to generational trauma. That is not a retrofit. That is pre-writing, or at minimum, surgical early foreshadowing. You don't accidentally design Laboon's scars to match a future skeleton musician's backstory. You don't whoops your way into a 50-year promise that syncs perfectly with the timeline of the Grand Line. This is an author who wrote the reunion first in his notes and then scattered the fragments across half the series. And I need you to see what that does to your trust. If Oda is willing to carry a whale's feelings across 500 chapters, are we really going to pretend he's freestyling the Void Century? If a throwaway Reverse Mountain joke was secretly an emotional time bomb, how much more intentional do you think the repeated talk of Dawn, Joy Boy, and the man who will change the world is? Listen to me. Laboon and Loguetown together are the Rosetta Stone. One shows you the scale of his emotional patience. The other shows you the shape of the final stage. So, when we move into Joy Boy, Laugh Tale, and the Will of D, we're not guessing anymore. We're just finishing a pattern Oda started drawing on page 1. Jaya, Bellamy, and the Dreamers are clowns. Thesis of the final war. And once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee Jaya. Because Jaya is Oda walking into the room, grabbing the community by the shoulders and saying, here is the ideological script for the ending. Please pay attention. That bar scene with Bellamy, that's not just some early arc humiliation gag. That's the mission statement of the world Luffy is going to burn down. Bellamy stands up, does his whole Age of Dreams is over TED talk, and the bar roars. The crowd, the culture, the default setting of this world is, dreams are for clowns. Sky Islands are fairy tales. The One Piece? It's probably just a metaphor, bro. Sound familiar? Because this is exactly the problem we have right now when fans insist the treasure is just the journey. Here's the thing. In Jaya, Oda already told you what category that take belongs to. The people who mock the unseen, who need reality to fit inside their current map, are the ones the story leaves behind. Luffy and Zoro refuse to fight, not because Bellamy is right, but because Bellamy is already irrelevant. He's punching ghosts. He's screaming at a future that's coming whether he believes in it or not. And then Blackbeard walks in. That tiny scene on the pier is pre-writing in pure form. Bellamy says the age of dreams is over. Teach counters with people's dreams. Never end. Same world, same rumors, completely opposite conclusion. I need you to clock how intentional that is. Oda is seeding the final war as an ideological civil war inside the Dreamer camp itself. Luffy and Blackbeard are both inheritors of Roger's era. One believes in freedom for everyone, the other believes in freedom for himself. So when fans argue about whether One Piece is real treasure or just vibes, remember Jaya. The entire arc is a rehearsal for the global reaction when Laugh Tale and the Void Century become undeniable. In Jaya, the Sky Islanders' fake crowd gets drunk, laughs, and beats up an old man. In the endgame, that same mentality is sitting in Marie-Joie, running a world government and planning a cleansing. Different scale, same contempt. We need to be honest about what Oda is doing here. Jaya is not a random detour, it's a lab experiment. First, humiliate the dreamers. Strip their bounty posters. Break their ship. Have the community point and say, "See? Reality won." Then send them literally into the sky. Prove the impossible thing was real the whole time. That structure is the template for the ending. Initial humiliation, then ascension. Luffy laughed at in Jaya, then vindicated by Skypiea. Luffy laughed at for chasing Roger, then vindicated by Laugh Tale and the dawn of the world. This is not a sin. This is not subtle. This is Oda running the same story beat at island scale before he does it at planetary scale. And listen to me. When we talk about Joy Boy, the Ancient Kingdom, and the Last War, we're just scaling Jaya up. The bar becomes the world stage. Bellamy becomes entire nations. The Sky Island is fake debate becomes the One Piece is just the journey. And Oda has already told you which side of that argument survives the final chapter. Skypiea, the prototype for the Void Century and Laugh Tale. So when that argument scales up, where do we go next? We go to the first time Oda runs the Void Century on a test server, Skypiea. And I need you to stop treating that arc as optional filler cosplay heaven, because structurally, it is the prototype for Laugh Tale. Here's the thing. Skypiea's core conflict is the Void Century in miniature. You have Shandora, an ancient, technologically advanced city that literally mastered dials and built a golden bell tower. You have that city wiped off the map by a world power and a god regime that rewrites who's allowed to exist. You have a hidden poneglyph carved into its ruins, and a bell that has to be rung so a message can cross centuries to the one person meant to hear it. That's not random adventure decor. That is the exact category of story the Void Century is in. Zoom in on that poneglyph. It doesn't just say, "Hi, thanks for visiting the sky." It directly links Joy Boy, Poseidon, and the ancient weapons. It tells you there was a promise to Fishman Island, that Joy Boy failed it, and that this failure is still hanging over the world 800 years later. So when Robin reads that, what's actually happening? The author is quietly telling you, this promise is a scheduled task in the narrative. Someone has to redo it, and given everything we know now about Luffy, Nika, and Fishman Island's prophecy, you know exactly who that someone is. Now layer Nolan's log and the golden bell on top. Noland writes down the existence of Shandora, the bell, the gold. His log survives. Centuries later, Cricket reads it, chases it, and Luffy ends up ringing that same bell so the truth of a lying story can be heard across the sea. That is a time-delayed communication from a dead civilization, waiting for the right idiot with a straw hat. Tell me that isn't the structural blueprint for Laugh Tale and the One Piece itself. The treasure is a message that took 800 years to deliver. We need to separate categories here. The general shape in Skypiea, ancient city, erased history, message to the future, feels absolutely planned as pre-writing for the Void Century reveal. That's Oda testing the pipeline. Lost Kingdom to Poneglyph record to chosen listener. But Eneru's moon trip, the cover story lore about space pirates and Burka ruins, that reads far more as retrofit, Oda going, oh, I can bolt this onto that old arc and expand the cosmology. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how long serialization works when the ending is fixed, but the middle can breathe. So listen to me. Skypiea quietly tells you what Laugh Tale is. It is not some random island with a pile of gold and a gag. It's the final bell. It's the last, loudest ring of the true history. The moment Joy Boy's failed promise gets completed and broadcast to the entire world. Which means the ending of One Piece is less about finding treasure and more about forcing everyone to hear it. The real question is, who exactly is supposed to be listening when that final bell rings? Alabasta and Enies Lobby, the first drafts of the final war. Who's supposed to be listening? We already saw the test audiences. Listen to me. Alabasta is the prototype for that final broadcast. It's the first time Oda runs a small-scale simulation of truth versus world government narrative and watches what happens. You've got a kingdom being quietly strangled by a warlord crocodile who is not a rogue agent but a government-approved asset. The WG stamp is on the guy destabilizing a nation. That's not an accident. That's intentional world building. And under that sandstorm politics you get two nuclear threads, Pluton and Vivi. There's an ancient weapon hidden in the country, a poneglyph in the royal tomb, and a princess desperately trying to save her people without triggering open war. That structure is not random. It's a scaled-down version of the endgame. Oppressed nations, secret weapons tied to erased history, and one royal figure standing between peaceful reform and total war. Here's the thing. The Pluton blueprints and the poneglyph aren't just cool lore crumbs. There are first hard evidence that the Void Century, the ancient weapons, and the world government's current power are the same problem. Why is a weapon's name carved into an indestructible stone? Why does the government want that stone destroyed but the weapon controlled? Because the history they're erasing is literally the instruction manual for how to blow up their system. And Oda doubles down with the blueprints in Water 7. Tom's apprentices are holding a backup copy of Pluton's design explicitly to keep it out of the government's hands. That is not casual. That's the author telling you. The people who fear history are the same people who want monopoly on world-ending force. When we hit the final war, those two threads are going to snap together. Which brings us to Enies Lobby, the point where the training wheels come off. In Alabasta, the Straw Hats topple a warlord but never say the quiet part out loud. In Enies Lobby, they literally declare war on the world government to save one friend. They burn the flag. They do it on camera. They make themselves enemies of the regime in the most theatrical way possible. I need you to clock how specific that image is. Not, we're fighting CP9. Not, we're mad at Spandam. A visual of Luffy firing a shot straight through the symbol of the entire system. That's not improv. That's the kind of panel you pre-write and then reverse engineer a whole arc to justify. CP9. The booster call mechanics, the train, the pigeon guy. Those are flexible. The flag burning is fixed. Pattern interrupt. Enies Lobby isn't foreshadowing the ending. It is the ending. Just with the stakes turned down so Oda doesn't blow his whole hand in year 10. What happens there? Luffy declares war on the world's rulers for one person's freedom. The future version is the same move, but scaled. War on the entire system to free every Robin on the planet and finally fulfill Joy Boy's promise. We need to stop treating that scene as a cool moment and start reading it as a storyboard thumbnail for the final war. And if that one image was pre-written, what else has been sitting in the spine waiting to be scaled up? Sabaody and Rayleigh. Oda. literally explains the ending structure? And Oda answers that question almost immediately at Sabaody. He just does it in the most "I dare you to notice this" way possible, by having Rayleigh sit the crew down and literally explain the endgame structure. Rayleigh tells us Roger's crew did everything. They reached Laugh Tale. They read the Rio Poneglyph. They learned the true history, the meaning of the Will of D, the state of the world during the Void Century. They discovered what the One Piece actually is. And then, they realized they were too early and walked away without pulling the trigger. That's not vague foreshadowing. That's a post-mortem. So what does too early mean? It's not Roger was too weak. Rayleigh spells it out. They didn't have the means or the timing to do anything about what they'd learned. The ancient weapons weren't gathered. The world wasn't primed for a global uprising. Joy Boy's successor hadn't appeared. In other words, the board state was wrong. Same information, wrong era. Here's the thing. If Roger's crew already cleared the information check, then Luffy's story cannot be about discovering new data. The author has removed that category of mystery on purpose. The difference between Roger and Luffy is not knowledge, it's conditions. Luffy's era is the one where Poseidon is born, Pluton is accessible, Uranus is implied to be moving, the Revolutionary Army is active, the Shichibukai system collapses, and the dawn of the world prophecy is ticking down. Same laugh tale, different fallout. And then Oda does the most on-the-nose meta move in the entire series. Rayleigh offers to tell them everything. He literally says, "Do you want to know the history, the One Piece, all of it, right now?" That's the author, through a retired protagonist, holding out the full wiki summary. And Luffy refuses. Hard. He says it would be boring, that he wants to reach it himself. Listen to me. This is not just Luffy is quirky. This is Oda standing up in the middle of his own manga and yelling at the community. The tension is not what is the One Piece. The tension is what happens to the world when someone finally uses it. The mystery isn't trivia. The mystery is impact. So I need you to see Rayleigh's campfire chat for what it is. Pre-writing exposition. This is Oda quietly handing you the macro structure of the ending years in advance. Step 1. Reach Laugh Tale. Step 2. Learn the same truth Roger did. Step 3. Trigger the global liberation event that Roger couldn't. He's not brainstorming this on the fly. He's unveiling a sequence he already locked in. The key takeaway is brutal in its simplicity. The ending of One Piece is not Luffy discovering something Roger missed. It's Luffy acting on something Roger couldn't act on yet. The real ending isn't the Laugh Tale visit. That's the end of Act 2. The final act is the world revolution that follows. And if that's the spine, then every prophecy, every dawn, every drumbeat of liberation has been pointing past Laugh Tale this entire time. So who exactly is supposed to conduct that final song? Ohara, Robin, and why the world government fears a single book. So who conducts that final song? The answer has been sitting in a burning library since 2002. We need to talk about Ohara, not in the sad backstory, cue the violins way the community usually does, but as a structural warning label Oda slaps on the Void Century plot. Ohara is a tiny island of scholars, a bunch of nerds who just want to read rocks, and the world government responds with full buster call, total erasure, kill every witness. One child escapes, one person who can read the poneglyphs, and the government brands her a devil child for the crime of literacy. That's not just tragedy. That's a mission statement. Ohara is Oda walking up to you, grabbing your face and going, "Listen to me. The information these people were chasing is so dangerous that the most powerful institution in the story will commit genocide to keep one book from being finished. Not a weapon. Not a super Pluton laser zap. A story. The true history." Here's the thing. Once you see that, the ending stops being, will Luffy find the treasure? And becomes, what happens when that story finally gets broadcast to everyone? The Void Century isn't trivia for wiki goblins. It is the payload of the final act. The Buster Call on Ohara is foreshadowing for a different kind of Buster Call, a narrative one, where the bomb is information detonating in the public consciousness. And Oda underlines that with Professor Clover's speech. This old man spends his whole life assembling the puzzle, stands in front of the Gorosei and starts naming it. An ancient kingdom, wiped out by the ancestors of the world government during a lost 100 years. He reaches the climax, the moment he's about to say the kingdom's actual name. And he gets shot mid-sentence. That's not subtle. That is the author putting a giant red "Do Not Open Until Finale" sticker on a single noun. The name Clover dies for? That's the same name Rayleigh refuses to say on Sabaody. The same history Robin keeps inching toward. The same reveal Oda has admitted he planned before Chapter 1. Different arcs, different tones, same protected secret. This is intentional category design in the storytelling. Anything touching that name gets censored, killed, or cut away. Which is why Robin's dream is not some side quest you politely clap for between Luffy punch scenes. Her goal is literally discover the true history. Rayleigh straight up tells us Roger already read it and was too early. Luffy can't conduct the dawn without the sheet music, and Robin is the only person on the planet who can read it. No Robin decoding the Void Century. No Laugh Tale payoff, no Will of D explanation, no global liberation. Roll credits on a failed Joy Boy speedrun. Now, planning-wise, I need you to be a little less of a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. The existence of a lost century, a destroyed kingdom, a persecuted scholar class? That's pre-writing. That's core lore Oda decided before serialization. But the exact shape of Ohara, the Buster Call timing, Saul, even Robin's specific childhood trauma, those are the parts you can refine, retrofit, and emotionally calibrate once the machine is running. This is not a sin. This is normal. The important part is that the slot Robin fills in the endgame was always there. The reader of history was baked into the blueprint. The tragic archaeologist who survives a massacre is the skin Oda eventually wrapped around that role. So if the story ends when Robin finishes the book Ohara died for, the real question isn't, what is the One Piece anymore? It's, what truth is so catastrophic that the world government burned a library to stop page 1? And what happens when someone reads chapter last out loud? Whitebeard's last words. The spoiler. Everyone ignored. And Whitebeard answers that question on the spot. The world asks, what happens when someone reads chapter last out loud? And this old man, half a torso at this point, grabs the mic at Marineford and spoils the ending. I need you to understand how insane that is. In the middle of the series' darkest war, Oda just says it. Whitebeard's last words are not poetic nonsense. He literally declares, the One Piece is real, and then immediately chains it to a prophecy. When that treasure is found, a war will engulf the entire world, bigger than anything Marineford can imagine. That's not vague. That's not a vibe. That is an author using a dying legend as a bullhorn to yell, final arc preview, please pay attention. And here's the thing. This absolutely murders the One Piece is just the friends we made along the way theory. Whitebeard sailed with Roger. He heard the truth from the source. If the treasure was purely metaphorical friendship, his speech makes no sense. You don't say, when a guy finds his buddies, the whole world will be set ablaze in war. You don't foreshadow global upheaval over group hugs. The community ran with that headcanon anyway because we're pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast, but Marineford is Oda putting a giant X through that interpretation. He doubles down by dragging the Will of D into it. Whitebeard calls out that one day, someone bearing the name of D will shake the world, carrying centuries of history on his back. That is a direct pointer to Luffy as the inheritor of Joy Boy's will. The guy who will finally say the words the ancient kingdom never got to finish. This is not a sin. This is not subtle. This is Oda putting the job description for main character On a billboard. Pattern interrupt for you. Marineford is not about Ace. It's about the ending. Ace's death is a tragedy. Whitebeard's speech is a table of contents. When he talks about a coming war that will make this one look small, when he ties it to the discovery of a very real treasure and the actions of a D, he is compressing the entire endgame into 30 seconds of screen time. So when fans ask, will One Piece end when they reach Laugh Tale, or will there be a war after? The answer has been printed since 2010. The treasure gets found. That discovery exposes the truth Robin's been chasing, detonates the Void Century, and triggers the world-spanning conflict Roger and Whitebeard were too early for. The world order breaks. The dawn hits. And from a writing perspective, this is pure foreshadowing built on pre-writing. You cannot drop a speech that specific unless you already know the shape of the final war, the role of the D, and the function of the treasure. Oda isn't spitballing. He's planting a flag years in advance so that when we finally get to that war, you remember Marineford and go, oh, he told us. Which means we need to stop treating Marineford as the climax of the old era and start reading it as the trailer for the last one. And then ask, who else already got to read that script and react to it on screen? Fishman Island, Joy Boy's failure, and Luffy's to-do list. Who already read the script? Fishman Island did. And listen to me. This is the part the community chronically underrates because it looks soft and colourful. So we file it under post-time skip filler vibes instead of Oda literally handing you the ending in a gift basket. Here's the thing. Buried under candy-coated racism and a Vander Decken foot fetish is the most important poneglyph in the series so far, Joy Boy's apology. Robin reads a message addressed to Poseidon, which we now know is Shirahoshi herself, where Joy Boy says, "Sorry, I couldn't keep the promise," in regard to Fishman Island and the Noah. That's not vague lore. That's a failed specific mission. He was supposed to do something with this island and this arc, involving an ancient weapon, and he whiffed it. And then Oda quietly attaches a giant neon redo later sticker. Neptune straight up tells Robin that one day, someone will come from the surface to fulfill Joy Boy's promise. You are not a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast if you connect that with Roger being too early, and Luffy being the one Shy Ali sees at the center of everything. That's the author spelling out. There is a to-do list, it is unfinished, and the protagonist will finish it. Now, the prophecy problem. Madame Shy Ali has a vision of Luffy destroying Fishman Island. Not attacking it. Destroying it. The king hears this, meets Luffy, and his reaction is essentially, yeah, that tracks. Maybe that's salvation. This is insane, but it's intentionally insane. Oda is forcing you to hold two ideas at once. Luffy as the island's doom, and Luffy as the only person who can deliver on Joy Boy's ancient promise. So we line up the categories. Joy Boy, Poseidon, ancient weapons. Fishman Island reframes Joy Boy not as a mythical mascot, but as a previous main character who tried to deploy an ancient weapon to literally reconfigure the world and failed. He had the Sea Kings. He had the Ark. He had a plan to change where this island exists on the map. And it still didn't happen. When Rayleigh says Roger was too early, this is the kind of operation he's talking about. Which leads to the logistical foreshadowing nobody wants to do the boring math on. If Fishman Island is fated to be destroyed by Luffy, and Joy Boy's promise involved Noah and Poseidon, the obvious planned move is relocation. Using Shirahoshi to command Sea Kings, hauling Noah, and dragging the entire population to the surface during the final war, while the Red Line and the Calm Belt system get torn apart. The island dies underwater, so its people can live in the sun. In other words, Joy Boy's failure versus Luffy's success isn't side lore. It's the emotional spine of the ending. Oda is not hiding this. He is doing the opposite of hiding this. He is handing you the checklist. Move Fishman Island, fix Joy Boy's promise, use the ancient weapons to reshape the seas. And I need you to notice how early he locks that in, Because the next step is asking what other failed promises are quietly waiting for Luffy to complete. The dawn of the world. Not a vibe, a scheduled event. So when Kureha stands over 140 years of life and goes, "The will of D will one day bring forth the storm. The day of the world's dawn is near," that is not just spooky grandma seasoning. That is Oda taking a highlighter to the endgame and then pretending he didn't. Because watch how this word dawn stalks you across the series. Pedro throws his life away on whole cake, explicitly saying he'll die for the sake of the dawn the Roger pirates once spoke of. Oden's journal? Same language. Wano must open its borders before the day of the world's great dawn. Roger and Whitebeard, on that rock in Marineford flashback, talk about a man who will carry centuries of history and usher in a new era the world isn't ready for. This is the same phrase, the same category of event, recycled for decades. Here's the thing, that repetition is the tell. If this were just vibes, the wording would drift. Authors forget, they paraphrase, they get bored of their own metaphors. Oda does the opposite. He keeps saying dawn of the world verbatim. He tethers it to D, to Joy Boy, to Laugh Tale, to Wano's isolation policy. That is not ambient hope. That is intentional pre-written terminology for a specific historical turning point he already knows the shape of. So what is the job of the guy at the center of all those circles? Luffy is a D. His fruit is the Nika model, the literal sun god, whose heartbeat is called the drums of liberation. He inherits Joy Boy's hat, Joy Boy's promise, Joy Boy's failure. He is repeatedly described as the man who will become the freest on the seas. That's not just a cool poster quote, that's a job description. The dawn is the moment the system that makes freedom impossible collapses, and Luffy, by design, has to push the button. And we need to talk about that button, because Oda has been quietly labeling it geography for 20 years. The red line cuts the globe in half. The calm belts choke the Grand Line. Fishman Island sits under the red line waiting to be moved to the surface. Ancient weapons are introduced with world-shaking range. You do not need to be a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast to connect weapon that can destroy islands, promised migration of fishmen, and dawn of the world into one planned event. The red line falls, the seas merge, the planet literally gets a sunrise it has never had before. And when does that happen? Right after the One Piece is revealed, because the treasure isn't the ending. The treasure is the key that explains why the world must be broken and rebuilt. The dawn is the real final chapter. Which raises a much more uncomfortable question. If the sun is rising, what exactly has to burn first? Or the will of D and Nika, from background mystery to endgame blueprint. What has to burn first is the old idea of what D even is. For years, the community treated that middle initial as a meme. Natural-born troublemakers. Enemies of the gods. A fun little branding iron Oda slaps on anyone who smiles at execution. But if you track it from Loguetown to Ohara to Dressrosa to Wano, you watch it hard evolve from quirky superstition into a genetic highlighter pen for a buried bloodline. The D isn't random. The D is a receipt from the ancient kingdom. Here's the thing. Every time an elder whispers, "The D are the natural enemies of God," they are not being poetic. They are accidentally summarizing the Void Century. The gods are the celestial dragons. The enemies are the people who opposed them, who lost, and whose descendants now carry a single letter and an inherited urge to punch the sky. That's not vibes. That's intentional world building. That's pre-writing. Now, pattern interrupt. Forget the letter for a second and stare at the fruit. Wano and Egghead rip the mask off Gomu Gomu and tell you it was never rubber. It's the Hito no Mi model Nika, a sun god. A myth passed down by slaves in Mariéjois, a story about a laughing, dancing liberator whose very body turns the battlefield into a cartoon rebellion. Drums of liberation, goofy fighting style, opponents literally smiling as they lose. This is not some late-stage, what if Luffy was a Toon Force gimmick. This is the author finally slapping the label on a box he packed in Chapter 1. Because go back. Luffy hanging from a tree, laughing at death. Luffy in Arlong Park, walking into a racial apartheid state and casually dismantling it. Skypiea, ringing the bell to free a sky island and fulfill a 400-year promise, framed against a giant sun. The pattern is so loud, you only miss it if you are, and I say this with love, a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, but somehow not in a panel literally called Dawn. Luffy has always been Nika-coded. I need you to see how these categories collapse. D. Nika, Joy Boy. Fans love to argue which one is the real thing. The answer is yes. Joy Boy is the historical role, the one who tried to bring the dawn and failed. Nika is the mythic mask oppressed people put on that memory. The D is the bloodline tag that keeps spitting out candidates until one finally finishes the job. Different names, same archetype. The person who reveals the true history and tears down the world government. And because Oda is an author, not a Reddit theorist, that archetype has a planned endpoint. The ending cannot just be Luffy versus Emu, winner gets a cool statue. We need to watch him fully embody the D. Nika Joy Boy trifecta. A man whose laughter triggers a literal and political sunrise. Ancient weapons activated. Red line shattered. Celestial dragons dethroned. The power structure doesn't wobble. It permanently rewrites. Luffy doesn't become king of the pirates as an individual flex. He becomes the living symbol of freedom that makes the title pirate itself obsolete. And if that sounds extreme, remember, Oda already told you the last page is drawn. The only real question is who still gets to stand in that new sunlight. The One Piece is real, physical, and also completely absurd. And that new sunlight is not just a vibe. It's not a group hug. It's not Luffy standing on a hill going, wow, the real treasure was the friends we made along the way. I need you to hear me. Oda has gone out of his way to tell you the One Piece is real, physical, and also completely ridiculous. Start with the loudest receipt. Whitebeard. Dying. Full shonen death monologue unlocked. He looks the entire world in the eye and says, the One Piece does exist. That's not metaphor energy. That's not how you foreshadow friendship. He then immediately ties the discovery of that treasure to a war that will engulf the world. You don't get a global conflagration because some guys realized they were already buddies. Then you have Roger's crew on Laugh Tale. They get to the final island. They see the treasure. They learn the history. And what happens? They burst out laughing. They're crying and wheezing, and Odin's narration tells you they laughed so hard they named the island Laugh Tale because of what they found there. Not because they had a good time on the boat. Because the payoff itself was absurd. Here's the thing. That reaction is the nail in the coffin for the just the journey theory. If it were purely metaphorical, you'd expect quiet awe, maybe some bittersweet tears, not this unhinged mix of hilarity and reverence. It's the emotional reaction you have when the author has planned a punchline for 800 chapters and finally cashes the check. Whitebeard promising a world war and Roger's crew losing their minds are in the same category of clue. This is a concrete discovery with insane conceptual consequences. And Oda has basically walked into the community's living room and said this out loud. In interviews, he's been very explicit. Fans have guessed close to the truth. But the One Piece is not the journey. It's not a bond. It's not some abstract Hallmark card. This is not a sin against your English teacher. This is fine. This is normal for adventure storytelling. The treasure can be tangible and still carry thematic weight. So we need a hybrid model. The working version that actually fits the foreshadowing is, the One Piece is a real accumulation left by the ancient kingdom. Physical stuff. Treasure, yes, but also records, technology, maybe a completed map of the world. The part that makes you laugh until you wheeze is the perspective it gives you on the world's history and structure. You realize the world government is a bit, the age of piracy is a bit, The entire status quo is one long, unfunny joke. And once you get there, the exact object stops being the interesting question. The interesting question is, what happens when that object and its message go public? What does the world do when the punchline drops? That's the endgame Oda actually pre-wrote, and that's where we're going next. Laugh Tale is a broadcast station, not a dragon's hoard. So if the punchline is the world hearing the joke, then Laugh Tale is not a dragon's hoard. It's a broadcast station someone unplugged for 800 years. And we need to go back to Oden's flashback, because Oda already staged this once. Roger's crew gets there. They see the treasure, they read the true history, they connect the poneglyphs, and they crack up. Not because Joy Boy wrote stand-up. Because the difference between the reality they uncover and the world they sail through is so absurd, it loops back around to comedy. They literally named the island Laugh Tale off that reaction. That's not random. That's the author telling you the world itself is the joke setup. And this island is the moment the bit finally lands. Now, listen to me, because this is where the foreshadowing turns into infrastructure. Those road poneglyphs, they're not 4 magic GPS rocks. They're routing tables. The history poneglyphs, distributed data chunks, scattered backups of a deleted operating system. Oharans treat them that way. Roger treats them that way. Robin literally queries them. The network converges at Laugh Tale, which means Laugh Tale is the server where all that information compiles into a single executable narrative. Here's the thing. In storytelling terms, that means Laugh Tale's job is revelation, not reward. It's the cutscene where the protagonist finally gets the full lore dump. Rayleigh spells this out at Sabaody. Roger's crew learned the true history, the meaning of D, what the One Piece is, and concluded they were too early. They get the data, but they can't run the program. So they laugh, they name the island, and they leave. And that's the narrative hinge. Because Roger couldn't act. Luffy will. The ending cannot be, they reach Laugh Tale, roll credits. That's not an ending, that's a loading screen. The planned structure is, arrive at server, download the truth, then go back into the world and overwrite it. If you stop at the island, you've basically watched a tutorial and then put the controller down. So what's on that server? I need you to entertain the boring technical answer, a mechanism or plan. Not just gold, not just friendship, but instructions from the ancient kingdom on how to reboot the planet, how to destroy or reshape the Red Line, how to coordinate the ancient weapons, how to restore some lost global configuration that made the sea one shared space instead of a bunch of fenced-off aquariums. This is not a sin. This is not Oda betraying the adventure to do sci-fi patch notes. This is normal endgame writing. You pre-write a manual, you scatter the pages, you make the hero collect them, then you force them to decide whether to actually hit run. So Laugh Tale is the setup. The emotional climax is Luffy standing there with the full script, drums of liberation in his chest, deciding what to do. And if you think Oda hasn't already foreshadowed the exact patch he's going to install, you're about to feel very pattern-seeking monkey into Jesus toast in the next section. The final war pieces are already on the board. So when Luffy finally installs that patch, who's actually on the server? Because listen to me. Oda has been quietly logging every major player into the endgame lobby for 10 years, and the queue is full. We need to start by just laying the board out. On one side, you've got the Revolutionary Army, Dragon, Sabo, the Commanders, explicitly framed as the anti-world government process running in the background. You've got the Straw Hats and their expanding friend circle of Grand Fleet, Wano, Fishman Island, Alabasta remnants. Opposite them, the Blackbeard Pirates, who are basically running an exploit build of the same system. D-Clan inherited will, but pointed straight at chaos and personal gain. Then you have the weirdos Oda patched in later, cross-guild weaponizing bounties in reverse, turning Marines into the hunted. The remnants of the Warlord system scattered and feral, Mihawk, Weevil, Boa, Buggy, all displaced by the abolition of the Shichibukai. The Marines themselves split between Old Guard Justice and whatever Garp, Smoker and Kobe think they're doing. Plus the SSG, the Seraphim, the we don't need pirates, we grew our own answer to the warlords. And above all of that, the hidden root account. Emu and the Gorosei, the part of the world government the world isn't even supposed to know exists. That's the full cast list. This is not random. This is not a sin. This is the architecture of a pre-written war. Here's the thing. Recent events are not just cool chaos, they're controlled demolition. The Reverie fallout shatters the illusion of stability. Sabo allegedly kills Cobra and becomes the Flame Emperor, turning the revolutionary army from fringe to headline. The Shichibukai system is abolished, which forces Oda to push those ex-bosses back onto the board as free agents. The SSG steps in as the new state-sponsored monster squad. Then Cross Guild happens and inverts the bounty economy. Suddenly, being a Marine isn't safe. It's a death flag. That's not just world-building flavor. That's foreshadowing for a battlefield where rank-and-file justice literally cannot function. Pattern interrupt, and then Emu presses delete. The cleansing of Lulusia, with an ancient weapon-coded sky laser erasing an island from the map, is Oda telling you the world government will absolutely escalate to apocalyptic measures. If they're willing to do that for Sabo's narrative inconvenience, what happens when the One Piece is revealed? The Void Century is public, and every D on the planet starts drumming. Whitebeard already gave you the patch notes. He prophesied a war that will engulf the entire world when that man finds the treasure. That speech is not improv. That's pre-writing. The existence of a final war was always planned. The exact faction loadout is where Oda retrofits. Cross Guild, the specific Seraphim designs, individual Marine defectors. Those are pieces he slotted into a war structure he'd already decided on. So when all those threads snap toward Laughtail and Egghead's broadcast, you're not watching chaos. You're watching a scheduled server-wide event. And in the next section, we need to talk about what emotional patch that war is actually installing. Egghead. Oda stops hinting and starts screaming the endgame. So when all those threads snap toward Laughtail and Egghead's broadcast, you're not watching chaos. You're watching a scheduled server-wide event that just hit the login screen. And Egghead is the moment Oda stops coyly hinting and starts shoving the endgame in your face with both hands. Here's the thing. Up to Egghead, the Void Century is a rumor, a crime scene outline. Ohara burns before we hear the thesis. Poneglyphs talk in riddles. Even Roger and Rayleigh just say, "We were too early," and peace out. On Egghead, Vegapunk sits you down and goes, "No, here's what happened." He confirms an ancient kingdom with technology beyond anything the current world can manage. He spells out that the world government didn't just erase a country. They built their entire order on top of its corpse and then gaslit the planet into calling that progress. Vegapunk having direct research on the Void Century is not foreshadowing. That's payoff. The man literally has the books from Ohara, the brain capacity to process them, and the moral panic to try and tell everyone. This is the author pulling the camera through the smoke and finally showing you the stage. The mysterious advanced civilization we've been pattern-seeking monkey guessing about for 25 years. It's right there, reverse-engineered into punk records, the satellites, and the giant robot under the island. And then you get the Mother Flame and Lulusia. That's the part where Oda takes the ancient tech from the museum display and fires it on screen. The laser from the sky isn't some new category of magic. It's explicitly powered by a mysterious energy source Vegapunk derived from the past. The world government is not only covering up superior technology, they're already using it as a precision nuke. So when fans ask, how does this all feed into the ending? I need you to see the blueprint. That same technological inheritance is going to be turned away from erasure and toward liberation. Same engine, different driver. Vegapunk's global broadcast is the rehearsal. He's trying to do over Denden Mushi what Luffy is going to do with his existence, force the world to confront the real history all at once. He wants a synchronized Ohara flashback for 8 billion people. This is not a sin. This is not subtle. The story is literally running a test of the final patch deployment. Egghead collapses the distance between setup and payoff. We're not dealing in vibes anymore. Oda is openly connecting Void Century records, ancient weapons, Imu's cleansings, and the Mother Flame into one continuous war crime pipeline. The categories merge. The thing hinted in Skypiea, whispered in Zoo, half shown in Wano, is now an active plot device that can delete a country if Saturn has a bad day. And that's why Egghead is the bridge. It's the moment decades of pre-writing stop being trivia and start being the runway to the ending Oda decided before Chapter 1. From here on, every reveal about Joy Boy, the One Piece, and that dawn of the world isn't theory bait. It's final approach. Which means next, we need to talk about what emotional payload he's actually dropping when that truth finally hits. The emotional endpoint. What the freest man on the seas actually looks like. So when I say emotional payload, I'm not talking about Luffy standing on a cliff going, "Wow, what an adventure," while the community plays sad AMVs over it. I need you to zoom in on the one line Oda has drilled into our skulls for 25 years. Not, "I'll be Pirate King," but "I want to be the freest man on the seas." That's the mission statement. Pirate King is just the job title. Here's the thing. If freedom is the core, then it can't just be personal vibes. Luffy chilling on the sunny while slavery, caste systems and information blackouts still exist. That's not freedom. That's a beach vacation on top of a prison. The story itself keeps telling you this. Every time he punches a Tenryubito, burns a flag, or wrecks a lab, the author is clarifying the category. Luffy's dream is systemic. He cannot be freest in a world that is structurally unfree. So when Oda keeps foreshadowing a dawn of the world, that's not poetic wallpaper. That's urban planning. The red line bisecting the planet, the calm belts trapping seas, Fishman Island literally under the boot of the surface world. That's intentional environmental storytelling of oppression. The most on-the-nose version is the theory Oda has been quietly feeding us. Destroy or reshape the red line, fuse the blues, and suddenly the seas are actually one world instead of 4 fenced-off arenas. Physical borders fall to mirror political and social borders collapsing. Now watch how obscenely planned this is when you line up the Straw Hat's dreams. Sanji's all blue. It's a joke dream until you realize you literally need a unified ocean for it to exist. Nami's world map? That's impossible in a world where whole regions are erased from public record by the world government. Robin's true history requires the end of information control, the fall of the taboo around the Void Century, and the poneglyphs going from contraband to curriculum. Frankie's ship that sails the world only pays off in a post-ending world where the world is a reachable, continuous space, not a gated maze. Luffy becoming Pirate King is just the key that unlocks that status quo shift. King of the Pirates means the man who reached the end, learned the truth, and had the will to act on it. The emotional endpoint is him finally being able to sail anywhere. No log pose anxiety, no government chokehold, no friends left behind because their race, island, or history is quarantined. And listen to me. Oda has been allergic to the real treasure was the friends we made cop-out from day one. Loguetown, Jaya, Rayleigh, Odin, every one of them hammers that the One Piece is real, tangible, world-shaking. So the final feeling isn't, we had fun. It's, we changed it. A world where Luffy's crew can realize their dreams simultaneously is the proof of concept that his freedom is contagious. But if that's the emotional endpoint, then we need to ask a much dumber, way more dangerous question. What specific move actually flips the world from before dawn to after? And what does Oda have to destroy to get us there? Inherited wills. Why the ending has to be a chain reaction, not a solo flex. So here's the thing. You don't flip the world from before dawn to after with a single punch, or a single speech, or a single gear anything. You flip it by cashing out every ghost promise this story has been dragging around since chapter 1. And that means the ending cannot be a solo flex. It has to be a chain reaction. Inherited will in One Piece is very specific. It's not just, my son also wants to be cool. It's dreams and promises that outlive the people who made them, passed down until someone stubborn enough, stupid enough, and free enough finally cashes the check. Roger dies, but his will to reach Laugh Tale and start the real story gets scattered through Shanks, through the era of piracy, through Luffy. Joy Boy fails Fishman Island, but his apology sits on a poneglyph waiting for a successor. That's inherited will, the story refusing to end where the character did. And Oda doesn't do this once. He does it compulsively. You've got Joy Boy's promise to bring Fishman to the surface. You've got Odin's will to open Wano's borders for Joy Boy. You've got Noland and Kalgra's bell ringing for centuries so someone will prove they weren't liars. You've got Pedro literally naming his death a down payment on the dawn. You have Roger reaching Laugh Tale, laughing, learning everything about the Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, the Will of D, and then saying, "We were too early." That's not flavor text, that's a to-do list. Now, if all of those pay off in separate, disconnected arcs, the theme collapses. If Luffy frees Fishman Island in a vacuum, and then 50 volumes later someone else opens Wano, and then the bell gets rung in a random epilogue, inherited will stops being a design principle and turns into background noise. The whole point is simultaneity. The world doesn't trickle into dawn, it snaps into it. Listen to me. Oda has been stacking these promises on purpose so he can knock them down in one orchestrated sequence. This is not me being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in a Skypiea cloud. Rayleigh literally tells us Roger could have done something after learning the truth but chose not to, because the era wasn't ready. Whitebeard dies announcing that someone will carry Roger's will and bring the world to its knees. Odin times Wano's opening for 20 years in the future. Everyone is pointing at the same moment. That's not coincidence, that's scheduling. So, in the final act, when Luffy moves, he's not just finishing his own dream. He's Joy Boy finally keeping the promise to Fishman Island as the sea level apocalypse hits. He's Roger's will reaching Laugh Tale again, but this time with the intent and the timing to actually use the One Piece. He's Odin's wish fulfilled as Wano opens and the borders stop suffocating history. He's Pedro's dawn, Nolan's bell, Tom's sea train, the revolutionary's gamble, all firing in the same window of time. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part. This isn't just foreshadowing. This is pre-writing at the thematic level. Even if Oda added specific promises later, the category inherited wills converge at the end is baked into the DNA from Roger's execution onward. The author didn't randomly discover that theme in Wano. He's been reverse engineering the final cascade for decades. And if the ending is a planned cascade of inherited wills, then we need to ask a much nastier question. What kind of event is big enough, violent enough, and stupidly hopeful enough to resolve all of them at once? Joy Boy's failure versus Luffy's success, the structural heart of the ending. So here's the thing. That big, violent, stupidly hopeful event is not a blank canvas. It already has a name. It's Joy Boy's failure, rerun as Luffy's success. We need to actually pin Joy Boy down, because the community treats him as this vague mythological vibe instead of a very specific narrative problem. Joy Boy is a real person from the Void Century, allied with the Ancient Kingdom, who made a concrete promise to Fishman Island. He was tied to Poseidon, to Noah, to the prophecy that Fishman would one day live under the sun. And then, he failed. The apology, poneglyph in the sea forest, is literally a permanent monument to a botched plan. The author carved the word failure into the bedrock of the setting and then told you explicitly this guy will return. Now listen to me, because this is where Oda stops hinting and starts screaming. Luffy isn't just similar to Joy Boy. The story frames him as Joy Boy's successor in the most on-the-nose, legally binding foreshadowing you can get. Zunisha doesn't say, "Wow, what a fun rubber boy." It says, "Joy Boy has returned." The drums of liberation in Wano are not a metaphor. They're a diegetic sound effect tied to Nika, the sun god form that the world government has been trying to erase from history. The Gomu Gomu no Mi being revealed as the Hito Hito no Mi model. Nika is Oda, putting a giant neon sign over Luffy's head. This is the one who will finish the job. And once you accept that, you inherit a structural obligation. If your entire saga is, the new guy will succeed where the old guy failed, the ending has to show the difference. Not tell you, show you. That means revisiting Joy Boy's pressure points. Fishman Island cannot just be an early detour. It has to come back as the stage where the promise is finally kept and the Noah plan actually fires. The red line cannot just be a cool map border. It has to be the literal wall that Joy Boy couldn't break and Luffy will. When fans theorize about destroying the red line and merging the seas, that's not random headcanon. That's the only kind of payoff that meaningfully contrasts "I'm sorry I couldn't do it" with "I did it and the world changed." That's also why the One Piece itself can't be disconnected from Joy Boy. Rayleigh tells us Roger was too early. Oden's flashback shows them laughing at a treasure that is both physical and conceptually absurd. Whatever that thing is, it was part of Joy Boy's original plan. The first attempt failed or was interrupted. The treasure just sat there waiting. Luffy using it correctly is the hinge of the entire story. The gun on the mantelpiece is Laugh-Tale. The shooting is Joy Boy's plan finally going off. So I need you to see how intentional this is. The final chapters basically have to run a side-by-side comparison. Void Century versus present. Joy Boy's broken promise versus Luffy's completed one. You will get panels that visually rhyme with the Sea Forest Poneglyph, with Fishman under the sun, with a world map that has literally changed shape. This is not a sin. This is pre-writing doing a victory lap. And emotionally, that's the climax. Not Luffy wins the fight, but Luffy fixes the promise. When we finally cut between ancient Joy Boy imagery and present-day Luffy ringing in the dawn, you're watching a 900-chapter setup close, which raises an even nastier question. If the promise is that big, what kind of world do you have to build afterwards to make it stick? So what is Luffy's other dream? And how does it end the story? You don't build a world that big just so Luffy can plant a flag and go home. So we need to talk about the one thing Oda keeps cutting away from. That other dream. We see it 3 times, and every time the camera slams the door in our face. First, the Grey Terminal flashback. Tiny Luffy, Sabo and Ace around the campfire. Luffy blurts something out. Ace and Sabo freeze, then burst out laughing and calling it stupid in that "I love you, but what is wrong with your brain" way. Oda hard cuts before the actual words. Then in Wano, Luffy tells the crew. Same pattern. Shocked faces, Usopp and Nami yelling, Frankie into it, Robin quietly intrigued, Jinbei stunned. Again, no text. Then we hear that Roger said basically the same thing, and Oden's journal treats it as this absurd, impossible wish. So the community did what the community does. We turned into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. It's a giant party. It's sharing all the world's food. It's turning everyone into pirates. On paper, these sound cute. They fit the whole Luffy is a child category. But listen to me. Do those really justify the reactions we see? Would Whitebeard, Rayleigh, and the Roger Pirates be floored by "big party go brr"? Here's the thing. The reactions are doing foreshadowing work. They tell you it's not just emotionally big, it's logistically insane. Nami and Usopp aren't shocked that Luffy wants fun. They're shocked because the moment you picture the literal implementation, you run headfirst into the red line, the world government, celestial dragons, borders, slavery, famine. You run into the entire operating system of the setting. So the dream has to be childishly simple in wording but structurally apocalyptic in consequences. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is exactly how you make an endgame promise feel pure and stupid and inevitable all at once. I want everyone to be free to do whatever they want on the sea. That's it. That's the sentence. A world with no borders, no slavery, no hunger, where the whole planet is one connected ocean and anyone can set sail. Suddenly you understand why it's impossible. To make that world, you have to erase the red line, flood the Grand Line into one sea, topple the world government, dismantle the celestial dragon's monopoly on land and sky, and redistribute food and technology so no one is chained to a country or a god. You don't tweak policy, you delete the map. And now Oda's old interview about having the final panel in mind from the start stops being mysterious and starts being terrifyingly intentional. Because what is that last image if not the punchline to this joke? A distant shot of a unified ocean, ships from every former nation partying together, sea kings and people coexisting, the sun high, the dawn finally here. A literal global festival of freedom. The story doesn't end when Luffy finds the One Piece. It ends when that stupid campfire sentence is visible, in frame, no dialogue needed. Which raises one more problem. What specific chain of events could actually break the planet that hard without just ending it? The last panel theory. Reconstructing Oda's 25-year-old image. So here's where we cash the check. We've spent all this time arguing that Oda is not a wizard improvising cool moments in a fugue state. He's an author executing a pre-written endgame. And Oda himself has said, multiple times, that he decided the final panel before serialization even started. Not a vague idea of the ending. The final panel, a specific image that he's been steering toward for over 25 years, through all the chaos, breaks and editor changes, and when you actually look at his visual and thematic habits, he's boringly consistent. Sun motifs, circles, back-facing characters at emotional peaks, ships heading toward horizons, parties framed as full-page spreads. He keeps drawing the same emotional grammar, just in different sentences. That's not coincidence. That's planned storytelling. So what has to be in that last panel? Not, it would be cool if, but it would contradict the manga if it wasn't. First, the dawn of the world. We've had Kureha, Pedro, Odin, Roger, Whitebeard, even the damn poneglyphs all chanting dawn as the endpoint of history. Second, Luffy's real dream, the one so stupid Oda literally censors it in story, has to be realized or undeniably achievable. Third, the Straw Hat's dreams need to be either achieved or placed on rails. All blue within reach, world map nearly complete, cure found, history uncovered, etc. And over all of that, there cannot be a sense of, and then the curtain falls forever. Oda's whole thing is inherited will. The adventure has to feel open-ended. So, composition. What does that actually look like in a panel you can thumbnail in your head? Here's the thing. We need a wide shot. A horizon. The sea. But not the sea we know. The red line is gone or broken. The ocean's unified into one continuous expanse. You see ships from everywhere. The Grand Line, East Blue dinghies, Wano-style boats, Fishman Island vessels on the surface at last, mingling in a single frame. People partying on decks. Sea kings not attacking, just existing. Somewhere in that chaos, the Straw Hat flag is visible. Maybe it's huge on the Sunny's mast in the foreground. Maybe it's smaller, off to the side, forcing you to scan the panel. And Luffy is there, laughing, mouth wide, maybe arms thrown up, maybe hat on his head or passed on, but crucially, his back is to us, facing the horizon. He's sailing into a world he just helped remake, not turning around to give you a neat goodbye. That one snapshot pays off the entire pre-writing operation. It's the freest man on the seas. in a world where the seas themselves are finally free. It's Joy Boy's failed promise completed, the D's storm having actually toppled the sky. It's every inherited will, Roger, Odin, Fisher Tiger, Saul, compressed into a single image of ships moving forward. Can I tell you the exact angle, the exact clouds, the exact laugh sound effect? No. But listen to me. Any ending that doesn't roughly match this silhouette would break the foreshadowing, break the interviews, and honestly break Oda's own stated intentions. Which leaves one last nasty question. What sequence of events could realistically tear down the red line, expose the void century, and not instantly drown everyone in the process? Counting the receipts, how much did Oda really plan? So to answer that red line question, we need to zoom out and count the receipts. Because at this point, the issue isn't what crazy thing could happen, it's how much of this did Oda already bake into the oven before Chapter 1? Quick recap roll call, so your brain is on the same page as mine. Laboon and Brook's 50-year promise. Skypiea's mural and its void century mirror. Ohara's genocide and the scholar's almost finished history. Rayleigh dropping the "we were too early" bomb at Sabaody. Whitebeard's "someone will find that treasure and the world will be turned upside down" speech. Joy Boy's apology to Poseidon. All the dawn of the world references from Roger to Pedro, Nika and the drums of liberation. Egghead casually confirming that the ancient kingdom was a techno-utopia and that the mother flame can literally punch holes in the ocean. That is a lot. But not all of it is the same category of planning. Here's the thing. Some of this is pre-writing, in the strict sense. The void century existing at all. The idea of a lost super-civilization crushed by the world government. The will of D as a bloodline that opposes that system. The final war and the dawn as the structural endpoint of the story. Laugh Tale as the place where you learn the truth. Laugh at the absurdity and trigger the endgame. Oda has said multiple times he knew the ending in the final panel. Those aren't just vibes. Those are spine elements. Those are pre-written. Then you have the strong foreshadowing. Laboon only really works if Brook and a musician's straw hat were planned together. Whitebeard's speech only lands this hard if Oda already knew the treasure was real, world-shaking, and connected to the void century. Joy Boy's apology is a loaded gun pointed straight at Fishman Island's promised migration and the red line problem. Those aren't random details he later repurposed. Those are intentional setups for decisions that were already on the whiteboard. And then, yes, there are retrofits. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how serial storytelling survives 25 years. Some specifics of Nika imagery? Almost certainly sharpened once Oda committed to Gear 5's tone. The exact form of the SSG, or cross-guild being buggy-shaped chaos instead of some edgy murder squad. That's the author looking at what the community loves, what the cast can support, and bending the route to hit those beats while still moving toward the pre-written destination. So the pattern is hybrid. Oda is not a pure 4D chess god who storyboarded every SBS gag in 1997. He's also not a drunk improv troupe stapling headcanons to manuscript paper. He pre-wrote the spine and the end image, then used foreshadowing and retrofitting to flex around it. And honestly, that hybrid is more impressive. It means he can keep the story cohesive while still responding to new ideas, new tech, even new memes. The world feels planned and alive because it is both. Which is why, when I say Oda told us how One Piece ends, I don't mean there's a secret spoiler panel. I mean the structure is so intentional that once you see the framework, the ending stops being a guess and starts being a deduction. So the only thing left is to run the deduction. What does that final sequence actually look like, step by catastrophic step? Fandom as pattern-seeking monkeys. Why we keep getting this wrong. And here's where our beautiful deduction machine crashes into our monkey brain. Because yes, the structure is intentional. But you and I, we are pattern-seeking monkeys with Wi-Fi. We see the framework and immediately start seeing extra frameworks, hidden frameworks, frameworks inside frameworks, until suddenly that cloud vaguely shaped like a hat becomes definitive proof that Luffy dies and Usopp writes the story. Listen to me. This is not a moral failing. This is not a sin. This is how humans work. Your brain is built to see faces in clouds, ghosts in creaking pipes, and Jesus in toast. So of course it sees foreshadowing in every panel border and every oddly framed seagull. The problem is, when the community quietly upgrades that instinct from fun headcanon to Oda's 12-dimensional master plan. Here's the thing. Once you decide Oda planned everything, confirmation bias does the rest. You go in believing he's an infallible pre-writing god, and suddenly every coincidence becomes intentional. Luffy's shoe facing east in Chapter 12? Dawn of the World symbolism. A random gag about a dragon. Secret Wano trauma foreshadowing. On the flip side, if you've decided he's just winging it, then every contradiction, every retcon, every power scale wobble becomes proof that he never planned anything at all. Same data. Two opposite stories. The difference isn't the manga, it's the story you're telling yourself about the author. And when we overcredit, we actually flatten Oda's real craft. If you treat every retrofit as 20-year foreshadowing, you erase the category difference between something pre-written, something genuinely set up, and something cleverly repurposed. Laboon and Brook, that's planned spine. Nika imagery from Skypiea to Wano, that's long-term foreshadowing, turning Kinemon's dragon gag into Wano trauma. That's a retrofit, executed with surgical precision. When you call all three the same god-tier foreshadowing, you miss the actual skills he's using: documentation, restraint, and shameless recycling. This is normal. This is fine. Every long-running series does some improvisation. Oda just happens to be better than most at hiding the seams. But when we insist there are no seams, we build a god out of a guy with a pen and a stack of notebooks. And that god is cruel. Because once you worship the fantasy version of Oda, who never changes his mind, no real ending can satisfy you. If your personal theory web has the One Piece being a quantum concept engine that rewrites history, and Oda only delivers a tangible treasure that triggers the dawn and a global liberation event, suddenly that's bad writing. Not because the storytelling failed, but because reality didn't match the headcanon fanfic you ran in your skull for 15 years. So we need to downgrade the myth. I need you to appreciate what he demonstrably does. Pre-writing the spine, foreshadowing key beats, and then retrofitting smartly when new opportunities appear. That version of Oda is still ridiculous. That version is still enough to make other authors cry into their story Bibles. Because once you accept that, you can stop chasing faces in the clouds and start asking a better question. Given the spine we can actually see, what ending does the text force him to write next? How misusing, foreshadowing, makes you a worse reader. And here's where we need to talk about your brain on foreshadowing. Because if every cool connection is Oda foreshadowed this 500 chapters ago, then that word stops meaning anything. If a term applies to every pattern, it explains nothing. It becomes fandom white noise. When you call Laboon foreshadowing for Brook, and then you call Cross Guild foreshadowing for the final war, and then you call D-Smiles foreshadowing for Nika, you're not analysing anymore. You're just pointing at clouds and insisting they're all dragons. This is not a sin. This is normal. Our pattern-seeking monkey brains want to see Jesus in toast and Oda in every panel. But listen to me. When every thread is foreshadowing, foreshadowing is no longer a useful category. A category that covers everything is just a vibe. It can't help you understand how the story is actually built, which means it can't help you predict, can't help you appreciate, and definitely can't help you distinguish between this was planned and this was a clever save. And that's how you end up with the shallow praise loop. Something pays off, and instead of talking about pacing, or how the author set your expectations, or how the emotional framing landed, fans just go, bro, Oda foreshadowed this in chapter 37. Full stop. Discussion over. The achievement becomes the timestamp, not the craft. That's the problem. You're grading a symphony on whether the composer mentioned the final note in the first bar. Here's the thing. Precise language doesn't make you a pedant. It makes you a better enjoyer. When you can say, this is pre-writing, this is foreshadowing, this is retrofitting, suddenly you can see the different gears in the narrative machine. You can tell when Oda is executing a blueprint versus when he's opportunistically reusing old material versus when he's just vibing. Take Laboon and Brook. If you're being precise, that's almost certainly early foreshadowing inside a pre-written structure. Oda decides, before Baroque works, there's a musician from a doomed West Blue crew. He's a skeleton. He promised a whale he'd return. Then, in the actual writing, he plants Laboon in Reverse Mountain as a setup fragment. That's intentional, targeted, emotional foreshadowing. Now contrast that with Cross Guild. The final war, the collapse of the Shichibukai system, the rise of new powers, that feels pre-written. But Buggy accidentally becoming a Yonko and fronting a bounty hunting corporation with Crocodile and Mihawk is a gorgeous retrofit. Oda looks at older pieces and says, I can plug these idiots into the war scaffolding I already planned. Same payoff density, totally different gear turning. Pattern interrupt. This is not gatekeeping. I need you to hear that. I'm not handing out a literary license exam. I'm handing you better toys. When our vocabulary gets sharper, the conversation gets less circular and more fun. Instead of endlessly screaming foreshadowing at panels, we can ask, what does this specific move tell us about how Oda is steering One Piece into its endgame? And that question is where things get dangerous, because once you sort the real setups from the retrofits, some very clear endgame shapes start to appear. Why over-mythologizing Oda actually undercuts his genius. And this is where the community does something very funny and very backwards. We sort the clues, we see the endgame spine, and then a chunk of fans go, see, Oda is a flawless god who planned every atom in 1997. And I need you to hear how weird that actually is. Because on paper, that sounds like praise. He planned everything. He never changed his mind. Every panel is perfect foreshadowing. But what you're really saying is that Eiichiro Oda, human person, has not grown, has not adapted, has not improved at his craft across 25 years of weekly torture. You're turning a working author into a robot executing a spreadsheet. Here's the thing. Genuine artistry is change. If Oda in East Blue had the exact same interests and priorities as Oda in Egghead, that would be the red flag. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most great storytelling works. You have a planned backbone, and then you keep upgrading the muscles and nervous system as you go. You can literally watch it on the page. Early One Piece is pure adventure energy. Goofy villains, punch the bad guy, eat meat, move on. Then Alabasta and Enies Lobby start quietly shifting the tone into political territory. Suddenly the world government isn't just a logo on a flag. It's a surveillance state, a censorship machine, a thing that erases Ohara off the map. By the time we hit Dressrosa and Wano, we're deep in colonialism, slavery, weaponized history. That's not a 1997 12-step plan firing on rails. That's an author whose anger and curiosity about the real world kept bleeding harder into his writing. Same thing with moral ambiguity. Early Marines, mostly Smoker being annoyed and Kobe being earnest. Fast forward and you've got Fujitora gambling his career on abolishing the Shichibukai, Akainu turning absolute justice into state terror, the revolutionaries sitting in this uncomfortable category where they're necessary and also terrifying. That nuance wasn't fully baked in Chapter 5. It's Oda iterating on his own foreshadowing, retrofitting simple uniforms into a spectrum of ideology. And visually, the paneling glow-up is insane. Go from Arlong Park to Marineford to Wano's raid spreads and you can see the compositional brain upgrades. He's juggling 10 factions, parallel action, silent reaction shots that carry more storytelling than entire early chapters. That is growth. That is practice. That is an artist reweaving the middle while the endpoint stays fixed. Honestly, the hybrid model he's running is harder than either extreme. It's easy to outline a static story and just march in a straight line. It's easy to wing it and pretend every coincidence is mystery. Holding a pre-written ending in your head while constantly revising the road to get there. Integrating new themes, new politics, new character obsessions without breaking the spine. That's a high-wire act over a shark tank. So when we scream, he planned every detail from day one, we're not upgrading his genius, we're flattening it. The more accurate, and frankly more impressive read, is that Oda is a flexible, responsive storyteller with a brutally strong backbone. The laugh-tale truth, the dawn of the world, the emotional endpoint have been there from the start, but the root has been hand-carved in real time. And once you accept that, we need to talk about what that fixed backbone actually is, because the clues about the ending aren't just abstract themes. They're concrete, repeated promises about the treasure, the war, and the final dawn he's been daring you to notice. Try to what this changes about how you watch One Piece tomorrow. So here's the thing. Once you see that fixed backbone, you cannot unsee it. Tomorrow's chapter is not random new hype. Tomorrow's chapter is either pre-writing surfacing, foreshadowing paying off, or a retrofit trying to keep the machine running. I need you to start reading with those 3 categories in your head. New reveal drops? Pause. Ask. Does this feel pre-written, foreshadowed, or retrofitted? If Vegapunk drops some bomb about the ancient kingdom that neatly lines up with Ohara, Skypiea and Zoo, that smells intentional. Long game pre-writing finally bubbling up. If a minor detail from Punk Hazard suddenly matters for the SSG, that's foreshadowing paying off. If something quietly redefines an older scene without strong paper trail, congratulations, you've spotted a probably smart retrofit. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. And listen to me, if you want to get good at telling the difference, you cannot just mainline Twitter threads. You have to touch grass, by which I mean interviews and SBS. Oda will straight up tell you, I had this ending plan from the start, or I thought of this during Marineford. When Rayleigh explains that Roger was too early, then 10 years later Oda says in an SBS that he knew the last panel before serialization. You can cross-reference that with when Void Century crumbs appear and see the skeleton of the plan. That's how you refine your sense of what was actually planned versus what was discovered in the writing. On the flip side, we need to calm down about viral foreshadowing threads. You know the ones. Grainy panel from Orangetown, zoomed in on a background seagull, circled in red. Proof this is IMU's pet. I love the pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast as much as anyone. But you have to start asking one annoying question. What evidence do we have that this was intended at the time? Not could be interpreted. Intended. If the honest answer is, we don't know, then you file it under fun coincidence instead of Oda 5D chess. You can still retweet it, just maybe don't build a 40-tweet manifesto on it. Because the healthier move for the community is shifting theory culture away from calling exact shots and toward understanding direction. Stop trying to predict the exact panel where Blackbeard dies and start asking, how does a story that's been promising a global dawn, a real treasure, and the freest man on the seas actually have to land? When you think in terms of structure and theme, you get to do what we did here. Reconstruct the rough shape of the ending without needing to spoil every beat. And no, this does not kill the mystery or the fun. Knowing there's a real physical One Piece waiting because Loguetown, Jaya, Rayleigh and Odin have been screaming it at you for decades doesn't make the reveal boring. It makes every new chapter a test of craft. How is Oda going to bridge Joy Boy's failure to Luffy's insane dream? How does Dawn of the World become an actual event on the page? The destination is fixed. The route is where all the chaos lives. Which means the real question for tomorrow's chapter isn't what crazy twist will he pull, it's which promise is he cashing in now. And once you start reading that way, a very specific, very uncomfortable implication about the final war setup snaps into focus, reframing Oda's genius, planning, flexibility, and the long game. So when that very uncomfortable implication about the final war snaps into focus, I need you to resist the urge to go, wow, Oda is a god, close the tab, and never think about the machinery again. Because the machinery is the point. The genius isn't mystical. It's structural. Here's the thing. Everything we've been talking about boils down to 3 pillars. First, the pre-written spine. Oda knowing the ending, the final panel, the void century framework, the broad shape of the dawn of the world, long before chapter 1. Second, intentional foreshadowing of key beats, Laboon and Brook's promise, early Nika imagery, the repeated D will bring the dawn drumbeat. Third, agile retrofitting, taking older pieces that were loose or symbolic and snapping them into that spine as new ideas appear. Individually, none of those are magic. Authors pre-write all the time. Authors foreshadow all the time. Authors retrofit all the time. The difference with One Piece is that all 3 are running in parallel at industrial scale for 20+ years. Pre-writing gives direction. Foreshadowing builds anticipation and coherence. Retrofitting keeps the story alive, responsive, weird. You can see the interaction in almost every major payoff. Rayleigh's "we were too early" speech. That's the pre-written void century and laugh-tail truth peeking through. All the dawn talk from Kureha, Pedro, Odin, Whitebeard. That's foreshadowing, an intentional chorus telling you Luffy will trigger a global liberation event. Then you hit Egghead, hear about the Mother Flame and the cleansing, and suddenly older, fuzzier details about ancient weapons or the Great Pirate era get retrofitted into a concrete final war scenario. Same spine, 3 tools. This is why One Piece feels both meticulously constructed and wildly alive. You feel the inevitability. Of course the One Piece is real treasure. Of course the ancient kingdom opposed the world government. Of course Luffy's dream that's even crazier than Pirate King plugs into Joy Boy's failure. But you cannot predict the exact route we take to get there, because the route is where Oda is constantly shuffling, upgrading, and recontextualizing his own material, and we need to kill the binary discourse that says he's either a hack who got lucky or a flawless god who planned every eyebrow raise in East Blue. He is a working artist. He is making thousands of decisions under weekly deadline pressure. Some are fully planned, some are pure improvisation. Most are in that messy middle where an old seed gets a new function. Pattern interrupt. This is not a sermon. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is what long-form storytelling looks like when it's done by a human being and not a prophecy machine. So, next time you see a payoff, I need you to do something. Don't just post the side-by-side and type, "He planned it from day one," as if that ends the conversation. Ask, which pillar is this? Is this pre-writing surfacing? Is this classical foreshadowing? Is this a retrofit welded onto the spine? Once you start categorizing instead of worshipping, the ending stops being a magic trick and starts being a solvable process. And if the process is solvable, then we can actually do the reckless thing I promised at the start. Use those pillars to predict the final panel with receipts. So yes, Oda told us how One Piece ends. Here's what that really means. So when I say Oda already told us how One Piece ends, I'm not saying he spoiled the last chapter in an SBS, and we all missed it while arguing about power levels. I need you to hear the actual argument. He didn't leak a plot twist. He pre-wrote the structure, and then spent 25 years foreshadowing the emotional and thematic shape of the finale in plain sight. Here's the thing. From Loguetown onward, he's been hammering one drum. The treasure is real. The journey is real. The consequences are real. Buggy, Crocus, Whitebeard, Rayleigh, Odin's flashback. They all point to the same skeleton. Luffy reaches Laugh Tale. He finds a tangible treasure that also reframes the world as a joke. He learns the true history, the meaning of D, Joy Boy's failure. That information doesn't stay on the island. It detonates outward as a broadcast or revelation that every corner of the sea is forced to confront. You already know the rest of the spine. That revelation ignites the final war that Whitebeard literally called his shot on at Marineford. The world government starts its cleansing. Blackbeard, Crossguild, the SSG, the revolutionaries, all those time bombs we listed converge. In the middle of that, Luffy doesn't just beat a boss. He fulfills Joy Boy's promise, shatters or reshapes the red line, merges the seas, and ushers in the dawn of the world that Kureha, Pedro, Odin, Roger, and half the prophetic cast have been muttering about for decades. That's the ending. Not the storyboard, but the blueprint, the destination, the weather, the emotional temperature in the room. We're not guessing this because we're pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. We're reading the categories Oda himself set up and following them to their logical conclusion. But, and this is where your brain wants to go, well then it's spoiled. The choreography is still wide open. Which island falls first when the seas go wild? Does Mary Joy's burn before or after the broadcast? Who actually clashes with Imu, with Blackbeard, with Akainu? Where do Vivi, Smoker, Bonnie, Yamato, every side character you're irrationally attached to get their payoff? That's where Oda's improvisation and retrofitting toolbox stays fully online. The man still has hundreds of micro decisions to make in the draft room. This is not a sin. This is normal. In fact, it's the healthiest possible way to do long-form storytelling. Knowing the destination and the broad strokes doesn't make the story predictable. It makes every chapter legible. When you see the phrase dawn of the world now, you don't go mysterious vague prophecy. You go, oh, that's endgame weather report. When Egghead drops another Void Century info dump, you can file it against a known endpoint instead of treating it as trivia. So I need you to stop reading One Piece as a magic trick and start reading it as a collaboration. You now understand the rules of the game this author has been playing. You know the categories. That means, for the rest of this video, we can do something way more interesting than will Luffy win? We can sit next to Oda as co-readers and ask, given this pre-written spine, what does the final panel actually have to show? Because once you accept that he already told us the ending in pieces, the only real question left is, which piece does he choose to leave you with on the very last page? Your new rule for calling something foreshadowing online. So here's where I stop theory crafting and start ruining your Twitter habits. If we're going to sit next to Oda and talk about the ending in good faith, we need to fix one thing first. The word foreshadowing. Right now, the community uses it the way a pattern-seeking monkey uses toast, pointing at every vaguely familiar burn mark and yelling, Jesus! This is the problem. This is where discourse goes to die. So here's the new rule. Don't call something foreshadowing unless you can at least argue for plausible author intent at the time of writing. Not certainty, plausibility. Could the author reasonably have planned this payoff when that panel first hit jump? Can you point to publication context, to interviews, to structural necessity in the writing and say, yeah, this was probably in the notes already? Listen to me. That one criterion alone cleans up about 80% of arguments. When Rayleigh spells out on Sabaody that Roger learned the true history, the meaning of D, and what the One Piece is on Laugh Tale. When Odin's flashback shows the crew laughing at a real treasure and naming the island after that reaction. You can tie those directly to Oda, saying he decided the ending and final panel before serialization. That's a plausible intentional chain. Call that foreshadowing. But when you see a random crescent moon in Skypiea cloud art and decide it foreshadows some specific Egghead reveal with zero evidence Oda had that exact detail planned in year 5. That's not foreshadowing. That's you freestyling. This is not a sin. This is normal. Spotting cool echoes in a 25-year story is half the fun of being a fan. So I want you to start using different labels. If you see a connection and you have no receipts for intent, call it a resonance. It resonates thematically. It rhymes. It's a satisfying echo. If you think Oda went back and assigned new meaning to an old element once the story evolved, Kuma's mission getting recontextualized by Egghead, for example, call it a retrofit. Save foreshadowing for the stuff where the author's hand is visible through the publication history, not just through your headcanon. And I need you to build in some humility. We don't know if this was planned is not a cop-out. It's the honest answer most of the time. Oda is a monster planner, but he's not a time god. Admitting uncertainty doesn't make your theory weaker. It makes your argument stronger, because you're separating what the text proves from what your brain is speed-running. Here's the thing. Once you adopt the three-category language, your debates get way better. Instead of screaming planned versus not planned, you can ask, is this pre-writing surfacing? Is this foreshadowing paying off? Or is this a retrofit that happens to work? Now you're talking about process, not just vibes. You're talking about how storytelling actually functions over decades. And that's how you become a better fan. More precise language doesn't kill the magic. It lets you see the craft. You argue less about whether the One Piece is just the friends, and more about how Oda has been steering you toward a specific emotional endpoint since Loguetown, which, conveniently, is exactly what we're about to map out, starting from the one clue everyone saw and almost nobody took seriously. If you've watched this far, you're not a casual. Act like it. Starting from the one clue everyone saw and almost nobody took seriously. But before we chase that, I need you to clock something very unsexy. You are still here. We are, an hour and a half into a video about foreshadowing categories and author pre-writing? This is not casual behavior. Casual fans scroll past panel collages on Twitter and move on. You just sat through me cross-examining SBS quotes like a gremlin lawyer. And here's the thing. If you're going to invest that kind of time, you owe it to yourself to stop playing on easy mode. You can't spend 2 hours learning the difference between intentional setup, retrofitting, and coincidence, and then hop back into the community and go, wow, Oda is just freestyling, huh? No. You've seen the receipts. You know he planned the ending, the Void Century, the D, the ancient weapons before Chapter 1. You don't get to pretend this is all vibes anymore. Listen to me. That doesn't mean you have to turn into a joyless canon cop. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. It just means when someone posts a Rayleigh speech screenshot and says, maybe Oda hadn't decided what the One Piece was here, you now have the tools to answer calmly. He literally told us he already knew. The tension isn't, does he have a plan? The tension is, how is he revealing a plan that already exists? That's the standard we need to hold ourselves to if we're going to call ourselves long-form fans. You are not a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time a sun symbol appears. You're someone who can say, this Nika panel, this is part of a pre-written liberation motif that connects to Skypiea, Fishman Island, and the final war setup, and then back it up with an example instead of vibes. And if you do that, you're in a smaller, much more interesting subset of this fandom. Most discourse is panel collages and power scaling arguments about whether Gear 5 Solo's Blackbeard. Fun? Sure. Surface level. The people who start talking about author intent, about why Oda keeps repeating Dawn of the World or staging those inherited will speeches, are having a different conversation. That's the room I want you in. Because going forward, that's the lens I'm using. We're going to take this same framework and run it on the final war scaffolding, on Egghead's information dump, on other series entirely. You enjoyed dissecting Oda's pre-writing? Cool. Wait until we aim this at something messier, where the author didn't decide the last panel in advance, and you can feel the retrofits in real time. Pattern interrupt. If that sounds exhausting, good. It means you care. And if you care, then subscribing, commenting, sharing isn't a favor to me. It's a way of telling the community, hey, This kind of craft-focused, 2-hour autopsy of storytelling is what I want more of. Which matters, because next we're going to cash in everything we've built and actually sketch the ending Oda already told us, using clues you've been reading for decades. Recap. The 3 keys to reading. One Piece's ending, like an adult. So, before we sprint into the home stretch and start calling specific shots, we need to zoom out. We've thrown a stupid amount of evidence at your brain. I need you to actually remember the framework, or the next chapter drop is just going to turn you back into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Joy Boy in every cloud. Here's the thing. There are 3 buckets. Pre-writing, foreshadowing, retrofitting. Pre-writing is the fixed spine Oda decided before Chapter 1. The Void Century mystery, the final war, the dawn of the world, the shape of Luffy's dream, even the final panel. Foreshadowing is when he plants intentional setups for those already decided payoffs. Retrofitting is when later ideas get cleverly mapped onto old material so it feels planned, even if the specifics weren't there yet. Applied to One Piece, the pre-writing bucket is stacked. The Void Century and Ancient Kingdom, the idea that Laugh Tale holds the full truth, the existence of a world-engulfing war, the red line as a literal and thematic wall, the dawn, and Luffy's insane dream sitting above Pirate King on the crazy scale. Those aren't improv. Those are the rails. Then foreshadowing is all the deliberate breadcrumbs pointing at that spine. Laboon and Brook's 50-year promise quietly proving that a promise across half a century is a core narrative move. Whitebeard's speech about the man who will shake the world and the war that will engulf the globe. Joy Boy's apology to Poseidon embedded in poneglyphs. Those are not random vibes. Those are the author putting the gun on the mantle because he already wrote the shooting. Retrofitting is the cosmetic surgery on top of that skeleton. The Nika specifics and Gear 5 cartoon physics wrapped around an already planned Drums of Liberation savior. The SSG and Seraphim slotted into the pre-written final war technology escalation slot once the Shichibukai were abolished. Cross-Guild emerging as a chaotic third-party force that still cleanly plugs into the existing world war with multiple pirate factions. Outline. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is fine. Put all of that together, and the reconstructed ending shape is actually pretty stable. Laugh Tale revelation first. The crew reaches the island, learns the Void Century truth, the Ancient Kingdom's dream, Joy Boy's failure, the real nature of the One Piece. That cascades into a global broadcast or truth reveal, a Roger was too early moment scaled up, where the world hears what was hidden. That triggers the world-engulfing war. Revolutionary Army, Blackbeard, Cross-Guild, Imu, SSG, everyone on the board. The conflict climaxes with the destruction or reshaping of the Red Line, physically uniting the seas and ushering in the dawn of the world, where Luffy's real dream, being the freest man and giving that freedom to everyone, actually lands. The mindset shift is the important part. Stop asking, did Oda plan everything? And start asking, how is he balancing pre-writing, foreshadowing, and retrofitting so this feels inevitable and still blindsides me? That's the adult read. And now I need you to test it. When a new chapter drops and Oda throws some wild development at you, don't just scream peak on Twitter. Ask, is this part of the pre-written spine, a foreshadowing payoff, or a retrofit snapping into place? Where does it plug into the Laugh Tale broadcast War Redline Dawn chain we just built together? Because in the next section, we're going to run that exact stress test on the craziest remaining mysteries. Your turn. Prove me wrong, or help refine the ending. So here's where I hand you the keys, and you either crash this whole model into a wall, or tune it into a race car. I've shown you my categories, I've walked through the receipts, I've argued that Oda is a terrifyingly planned author with a pre-written spine. Now I need you to stress test it. If you think I called something a retrofit, that is actually clean foreshadowing? Call me out. Drop the arc, the chapter, the panels, and explain the intentional chain. What did Oda know at the time? What payoff did he deliver? And what's the evidence it was planned rather than, hey, this old toy fits the new shelf? And the reverse. If I praise something as god-tier foreshadowing and you're convinced it's just a clever retrofit, walk me through that too. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal. Here's the thing. I don't want "nah, you're wrong" in the comments. I want case files. At 1:23:45 you said X about Nika imagery, but compare that to chapter Y and this interview. Timestamps, quotes, your favorite example where the framework actually changed how you see an arc, or where it completely broke for you. If the Skypiea to Haki pipeline, or the early One Piece's real speeches, or the Dawn of the World stuff suddenly snapped into focus for you, tell me exactly where. Second job. If the spine is roughly laugh tale to broadcast to global liberation to redline event to dawn, then within that constraint, what's your final panel? Not Luffy smiles. Be specific. Is it the Straw Hats watching the new world map after the red line falls? Is it kids in some East Blue village reading about Joy Boy in a history book that finally exists? Is it the D initial written on a poneglyph fragment on someone's mantle? I need you to pitch what you think Oda's 25-year-old mental screenshot actually was, and why it fits the planned endgame we just built. And please, I am begging you as a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time Oda draws a circle. Do not just comment W video. W video is fine. W video is appreciated. But the algorithm doesn't understand W. It understands watch time, long arguments, people fighting in the replies about whether Enel's moon trip is foreshadowing or pure chaos gremlin energy. If you want more absurdly long, nerdy breakdowns of writing and storytelling, this is the cost. We need to feed the robot. Because listen to me. If we don't fix how this community talks about foreshadowing now, when the actual ending drops, I'm going to have to make a sequel that is double this runtime, with 3 times the charts, and nobody is ready for that export time, least of all my hard drive. So if you want to be there when we finally get to hold Oda's real last panel up against this framework, hit subscribe, stick around, and start building your case in the comments.